A group of children were playing at fighting when the story began. A young boy, claiming to be a powerful sorcerer, struck a girl on the head with a wooden branch after she pretended to be a monster that hunts wizards. When the girl cried out and questioned why he had actually hit her, the boy simply argued that in their games, monsters are always supposed to be defeated by wizards. Watching the scene, an elderly man named Rabs commented on the children's morning energy. The boy, recognizing the elder, asked him how one could join the ranks of the wizards. Rabs, however, explained that magic isn't gained through simple wishes. According to him, wizards occupy the highest levels of society. They are noble knights who possess magical power because they inherited it from their ancestors. He told the children that, unfortunately, they could never become part of that world. Nearby, a villager overheard the conversation and chided Rabs for being so blunt. He then shifted the topic to a frightening rumor about a monster appearing nearby. Rabs confirmed the news was true, mentioning that a man named Rop had encountered the beast at the village entrance the previous night. The creature was described as a massive, house-sized leopard cloaked in pitch-black shadows. Despite the danger, Rabs told the man not to panic, as the village chief had traveled to the city to hire a wizard to hunt the beast. The girl's mother felt relieved by this update. She spoke to her daughter, telling her she must stay out of the forest for the time being. Rabs added a final warning to the group, noting that without a wizard, killing such a monster is virtually impossible. As the villager checked if everyone in the area had been warned, he specifically asked if the shepherd living on Hisarul Hill had been told. Up on that hill, a shepherd named Turan lay resting under the open sky. He felt trapped in a monotonous life, thinking about how he saw the same landscape every single day. He even worried that he might eventually lose his ability to speak due to the isolation. His thoughts were interrupted when Rabs arrived and insulted him, calling him a lazy brat for slacking off before sunset. Turan didn't seem bothered and simply asked the old man to step aside because he was blocking the sun. Agitated by the young man's lack of respect, Rabs asked if Turan was still holding a grudge over an old conflict. Turan confirmed this, bringing up the time his mother passed away, and Rabs tried to seize her sheep to make them communal property. After the old man awkwardly cleared his throat, Turan made it clear that he wasn't generous enough to give away his inheritance. He told Rabs that they weren't on friendly terms and bluntly asked him to go away. Frustrated by the shepherd's attitude, Rabs shouted at the young man, who simply glared back and asked why he was being bothered. The elder explained that a massive monster had been spotted, a house-sized leopard originally found by a man named Rop. While Turan acknowledged the gravity of the situation, Rabs was struck by the boy's lack of fear, especially since he was in a vulnerable position. Rabs advised him to stay alert and mentioned that the village chief was currently seeking a wizard's help. Although the old man claimed he had only come out of genuine concern, Turan doubted his honesty, suggesting instead that Rabs was more worried about the safety of the sheep than his well-being. Before the elder could yell again, Turan insulted him by complaining about his bad breath and told him to leave, watching as the old man walked away. Once alone, Turan pondered the nature of monsters, viewing them as creatures possessing mysterious, magical powers. He reasoned that if humanity had wizards, then the animal kingdom had monsters. He felt a spark of excitement at the news of a wizard's arrival, eager to finally see one with his own eyes, though he remained skeptical about whether a wizard hired by a small-town official would actually be impressive. Despite his doubts, he was curious to witness their true strength. His reflections were cut short when he caught the scent of blood in the air. Driven by curiosity, he descended into the forest to track the smell. After focusing on the trail and moving deeper into the woods, he came to a sudden, horrifying halt. On the ground before him lay the remains of Rabs, whose body had been torn to pieces. Turan ironically noted that the man who had warned him to be careful was the first to fall. Looking at the carnage, he realized no normal animal could have caused such damage. It had to be the work of the monster. Just then, a heavy paw hit the ground, and a massive creature emerged from the shadows. As the beast crept closer, Turan stared it down, finally accepting that the terrifying rumors were entirely accurate. Meanwhile, back in the village, the young boy who had been playing was asking his father about the strength of these beasts. He wanted to know if it was true that adults stood no chance against them. His father confirmed their terrifying power, explaining that any ordinary person who tried to fight one would likely leave nothing behind to be buried. When the boy asked about the fate of the village, his father reassured him that the chief's wizard would handle the situation. He insisted that a wizard could never lose, describing them as elite beings born with magical gifts who could slay a monster with just a single word. At that very moment, As the beast lunged toward him, Turan looked directly at the creature and commanded it to die. Upon receiving the command, the beast recoiled, creating some distance between itself and Turan. As the shepherd began to emit a strange aura, the creature snarled at him. Turan began to doubt if his abilities were working, especially after he ordered the monster to stop during its next leap and noticed it only pulled back momentarily. He realized that while he couldn't kill it with a simple word, he was frustrated that he couldn't even freeze it in place. The monster struck again, but Turan managed to dodge the blow, leaving the beast to turn and find him standing off to the side. Having formed a plan, Turan reached into his coat and retrieved a rock, remarking that he should stick to his skills as a shepherd. As the beast prepared for another lung, he commanded the stone to harden before placing it into his sling. With his eyes glowing a brilliant gold, he ordered the projectile to gain speed. He stepped forward, swinging the sling and telling the stone to pierce through his target. The rock took flight with such incredible velocity that it appeared to break the sound barrier. It moved too fast for the beast to fully escape. The stone grazed the creature's ear as it whistled past into the air. The monster launched a final, desperate attack with its jaws wide open, but Turan remained calm, noting that it was actually aiming for his head. Suddenly, the stone he had thrown stopped mid-air. It twirled and then smashed violently into the back of the monster's skull, completely blowing it apart. Standing over the lifeless body, Turan thought about how this was his first time using that particular technique against a monster. He grumbled about how the villagers were making him work too hard and wondered if he should just dump the carcass into a nearby valley. In reality, Turan was a wizard. He had first discovered his extraordinary talents 8 years earlier at the age of 10, when he discovered he could make heavy logs float. Back then, he had excitedly called out to his mother to show her how he could control the wind and create fire. However, his mother's reaction was not what he expected. She screamed at him to stop, marking the only time she ever showed him true anger. When he asked what was wrong, she sat him down for a serious talk. She asked if he wished to stay with her for a long time, and when he said he did, she made him promise never to use his powers again, especially not in front of others. She reminded him of the tales regarding nobles and knights, explaining that while anyone with magic is called a wizard, their origins differ. She taught him that nobles are the descendants of divine beings known as the Phryans, who once saved humanity, whereas knights are the offspring of nobles and humans. Confirming he understood her explanation, the boy listened as his mother clarified that these origins were the reason for the different ranks within the wizarding community. She revealed that his own power was inherited from his father, who had been a knight, and warned him that certain wicked nobles treated knights as nothing more than slaves. Because of this danger, she insisted that he must keep his magical identity a complete secret. 8 years have since gone by, and Turan has remained faithful to the vow he made to his mother. He has no intention of ever breaking that promise, nor does he feel any desire to reveal his true self or leave his mountain home. However, his solitude was interrupted when someone began pounding on his door, shouting for him to step outside. When Turan opened the door to see what was happening, he yawned and asked if they were actually accusing him of killing Rabas. The angry villagers grabbed him by the collar, calling him shameless and claiming he had harmed the old man before leaving him to be devoured by monsters. Turan remained silent, quickly realizing that they were trying to frame him. He figured that since the village's eldest member had died while the younger men were too frightened to fight, they saw him as the perfect scapegoat to shift the guilt away from themselves. As one villager tried to strike him, Turan easily dodged the blow, thinking about how useful magic could be. He headbutted the attacker and reflected on how a strong intent consumes mana. When another man charged at him, Turan whispered a command for him to trip. As the man hit the ground, Turan noted that he didn't need to do anything dramatic like starting a fire. He just used tiny, subtle amounts of power to dominate them without causing any deaths. Before long, the struggle ended with all the men defeated and scattered across the ground. Turan, who had successfully hidden his nature for nearly a decade, told the men they should have channeled that energy into Rabas's funeral instead. He then turned to the nearby women and asked if they intended to fight as well, but they replied they had only come to watch. He told them to take the fools away with them. Back inside, Turan anticipated that things would be chaotic in town again. He suspected the villagers would use the fight as an excuse to cheat him during future trades, but he decided he would simply use force again until he received a fair price. He felt confident that the beating he gave them would keep them away for a while. However, another knock soon sounded at the door. Calling them insane for returning so soon, he threw the door open only to find a tall stranger standing there. The man apologized for the intrusion, explaining that he was a traveler looking for a favor. Realizing this wasn't another villager, Turan apologized in return, explaining that he had just dealt with some very unwelcome guests. Feeling slightly awkward about his lack of social grace with the locals, Turan wondered if he had been polite enough, remembering the manners his mother had instilled in him. It was unusual to see a sword-bearing traveler in such a quiet, forgotten town. Though Turan initially suggested the man look elsewhere for an inn, the loud rumbling of the stranger's stomach changed his mind. With a sigh, he invited the traveler inside. While preparing a modest meal, Turan apologized for the lack of variety, explaining that he didn't have much to offer. To his surprise, the traveler considered the food a feast, and remarked that Turan likely hadn't met many outsiders. Turan confirmed this, sharing that he had spent his entire life on that very hill working as a shepherd. He noted how rare it was for a tourist to visit such a tiny village. The traveler found this fascinating. He was impressed by Turan's refined manners and assumed his parents had done an excellent job raising him. Turan credited his mother, though he mentioned she had passed away from an illness years ago. In response, the man offered a kind word, saying she had raised a son to be proud of and was surely resting with the gods in heaven. After thanking him for the hospitality, the man listened as Turan asked what had brought him to such a remote area. The traveler explained that he was there to fulfill a request. He had been asked to deal with a monstrous puma. He then revealed his true identity as a wizard. Realizing this was the person the village elder had mentioned, Turan listened as the wizard began to ask his own questions. The man confessed that while he could sense a monster nearby, he couldn't see it anywhere. He found it strange that Turan remained so calm despite knowing about the beast and the elder's concerns. Since Turan was the most likely target for an attack, the wizard remarked that he seemed remarkably brave for a simple shepherd and asked who he really was. As the man questioned him, Turan's mind flashed back to a conversation from his childhood. He had once asked his mother why his magic had to stay a secret. She had used a metaphor to explain the danger, comparing nobles to shepherds and knights to the dogs they kept. She warned him that while they might act with affection, they wouldn't hesitate to sell or sacrifice him. Her greatest fear was that if other wizards discovered his power, they would separate him from her and turn him into a shepherd dog to be used and discarded. She told him she wanted a better life for him and asked if he wanted to stay by her side. When he agreed, she gave him a final, chilling warning. To keep his identity hidden, he might one day even be forced to kill. Turan quietly pondered the situation, while the older man, sensing the silence, asked if he was unable to answer the question. After staring at him for a moment, Kyoran let out a nervous laugh, remarking that Turan's serious expression was making his little joke feel quite awkward. Realizing it had all been a prank, Turan apologized for his lack of a sense of humor. Kyoran, however, insisted that he was the one at fault for flustering the young man, admitting he had taken the teasing too far because the boy's reaction was so entertaining. As they moved past the awkwardness, the traveler noted that they hadn't introduced themselves properly yet. The older man revealed his name was Kyoran and described his life as a wanderer. Feeling he should have spoken up first, Turan introduced himself as an 18-year-old shepherd. When Kyoran mentioned he was 75, Turan was surprised, noting that the man didn't look old at all for his age. Kyoran explained that this was because wizards age much more slowly than normal people, allowing them to enjoy much longer lives. Curious about his lifestyle, Turan asked how he had become a traveler. Kyoran explained that after serving the Arabian family for 60 years, he finally decided to leave. He expressed a desire to spend his later years roaming freely rather than settling down, an idea that Turan found quite romantic. As they continued their harmless chat, Turan realized he had never known that talking with a good person could be so much fun. The two continued talking until the sun began to rise over the horizon. Noticing how much time had passed as the light grew, Kyoran handed over an Arabian silver coin. He explained that it was made of the purest silver and was worth far more than the meal he had eaten. Turan accepted the payment with gratitude and wished the man a successful hunt. Kyoran told him not to act as if they would never meet again, suggesting he might stop by a few more times to mooch off him before finally moving on. Later that day, it was time for the sheep to graze, so Turan walked out to the fields. He gave a command for the animals to gather, and they immediately looked at him and began walking his way. Reflecting on the encounter, he realized that Kyoran was the first wizard he had ever met. He wondered how long it had been since he had a conversation that felt so natural and easy. Turan was struck by the humor and warmth in the man's speech, which surpassed that of any adult he had ever known. He truly believed Kyoran was a good person, especially remembering that the man had even returned with a wolf. Before this meeting, Turan had always assumed that knights were nothing more than emotionless hunting dogs serving arrogant nobles. Turan couldn't help but wonder how he was supposed to inform Kyoran that there were no longer any monsters left on Hisaral Hill. At the same time, Kyoran was trekking through the woods, noting that the atmosphere felt incredibly bizarre. Although he spotted the messy remains of a fight, he couldn't detect a monster's presence anywhere. His confusion grew when he looked up and found a small stone from a sling buried deep inside a tree trunk. He started to question if someone had already hunted the beast, wondering if the village chief had hired a second wizard, yet he felt a sense of relief knowing the area might be safe. However, his relief was short-lived when he suddenly sensed a presence and turned to find the monster approaching him with its face horribly mangled. As the creature let out a terrifying howl, Kyoran identified it as a wraith. He quickly leaped backward to avoid an incoming strike, reflecting on how a dead monster turns into a vengeful spirit if its mana isn't properly absorbed or dispersed. Since any professional monster hunter would know this basic rule, Kyoran concluded that whoever killed the beast must have been a wizard, though he couldn't figure out if they were just ignorant or had left it to transform on purpose. He reasoned that a novice knight would never have the skill to take down such a beast, but regardless of the killer's intent, he knew he had to destroy the spirit. Kyoran drew back a bow made of pure lightning and fired a magical arrow, but the attack simply vanished the moment it touched the monster. This led him to wonder if the creature's mana was actually much stronger than his own. Suddenly, the beast sank into the earth. As Kyoran tried to predict its next move, the monster emerged from his own shadow and loomed over him, striking his arm and drawing blood. Kyoran realized that this was a level of combat a mere knight couldn't handle. In his view, only a noble, even one of lower rank, would stand a chance. As he was knocked backward, he marveled at the irony of encountering such a powerful wraith in a tiny, remote village. The beast began to twist its body, transforming into a form even more disgusting and horrific than before. Believing his end was near, Kyoran refused to give up without a fight. He vowed to take the monster with him to the grave, planning to focus every bit of his remaining mana into his hand to deliver a fatal stab as the creature lunged. Just as the two were about to collide, a shining object suddenly whistled out of the dense jungle. It was a single rock, and it struck the monster with immense force. Kyoran watched in total bewilderment as the creature collapsed to the ground. When Turan approached to check if he was all right, the older man remarked that the shepherd's sudden appearance was just as startling as one of his jokes. Realizing the truth, Kyoran asked why the boy had hidden the fact that he was a wizard. Before Turan could respond, Kyoran shifted the question, wondering why the boy had bothered to save him when he could have easily walked away and left him to die. Recalling the night Kyoran had brought him a dead wolf, Turan explained that his reasons were simple. He reminded the man that with such high-level skills, he could easily earn a much more comfortable living elsewhere. Kyoran had called the villagers pitiful, explaining that those living on the frontier spend their lives trembling in fear without any real protection. Although Turan argued that this wasn't the man's responsibility, Kyoran insisted that because wizards inherit the power of gods, they should take pride in protecting the defenseless. He did admit, however, that not every wizard shared this philosophy, as everyone chooses their own path. As the monster rose for another strike, Kyoran smiled but quickly turned serious. He warned Turan that this beast was far beyond their level and that only a noble could truly face it. He urged the boy to run to the village chief, start an evacuation, and leave him to hold the monster off. Though Kyoran had spoken bravely, he privately doubted how long he could actually last. Turan calmly told him not to worry, claiming that if his previous attack had landed, everything would be fine. Confused, Kyoran wondered if the boy had been holding back his true strength, initially doubting that a young knight hiding in the mountains could defeat a wraith that usually required noble intervention. However, Kyoran soon realized he wasn't just witnessing a chance encounter in a rural village or the bravado of a runaway knight. Instead, he felt he was watching the rise of a wizard who might one day change the world. Turan stood firm before the beast, declaring his desire to finally test the true extent of his limits. Despite the boy's incredible talent, Kyoran refused to let him fight alone, insisting the opponent was too dangerous for them not to work together. But as the monster lunged, a sudden lightning-fast attack sent it flying before Kyoran could even react. Realizing he was actually getting in the way and providing no real help in the heat of the moment, Kyoran decided his new role was to support the young shepherd and help his talent truly bloom. Meanwhile, Taran launched a relentless series of strikes at the beast. Despite his speed, he soon realized the situation was becoming difficult, as his physical hits seemed to be having no real effect on the creature's body. Kyoran shouted a warning that physical strikes alone would never be enough to destroy a wraith. When Taran asked for a different way to kill the creature, the older man instructed him to use elemental magic like lightning or fire. Following this advice, Taran's eyes began to glow as he summoned flames, but he quickly noticed that the fire simply bounced off the monster's hide without causing any damage. This failure left Kyoran in a state of shock. He realized that Taran seemed to lack the basic common sense of a wizard, specifically the fundamental rule of establishing causality to make magic affect a living target. It became clear to Kyoran that while Taran had indeed killed the original beast, his lack of knowledge had allowed it to transform into a wraith. He concluded that the boy had likely never absorbed mana in his life. Despite his disbelief at Taran's ignorance, Kyoran was still stunned by the youth's raw power. He coached him further, explaining that he shouldn't just light a fire, but must actively create and launch the flame at the target. Taran quickly regained his footing and began to channel the fire into his hand. Kyoran noted to himself that while creating fire is simple for a wizard, controlling it usually requires extensive training. However, Taran mastered the task instantly. With a powerful flame now at his command, the boy stepped forward and hurled the fire at the monster. The resulting explosion caused the creature to scream as it began to burn. Kyoran urged Taran to stay focused and keep pouring his mana into the spell to ensure the fire didn't go out until every trace of the wraith was incinerated. As Taran intensified his mana, his eyes shimmered with rainbow colors and the flames grew even more violent. Once the battle ended, Kyoran could hardly believe they had won. He reflected on the absurdity of the situation, noting that while it usually took the power of a noble to face such a strong wraith, a mountain shepherd had just taken it down. When Taran asked if it was finally over, Kyoran warned him that to prevent another wraith from appearing, he had to absorb the monster's mana. He instructed the boy to imagine drawing something into himself, and as Taran placed his hand on the remains, a green aura gathered into his palm and circulated through his body. As Taran began to shiver from the sensation, Kyoran mentioned that he would feel a specific kind of pleasure from the process. Even after witnessing it, the older man found it hard to believe this was truly Taran's first time absorbing mana. He explained that while mana typically grows slowly with age after an awakening, the fastest way to increase power is by taking it from defeated wizards or monsters. Given that this was Taran's first time, Kyoran realized the boy's natural potential was on an entirely different level, leading him to believe Taran must be of noble blood. Showing newfound respect, Kyoran bowed and apologized for his earlier rudeness, asking which noble house the boy belonged to. Taran, however, simply told him to worry about wiping the blood off himself first. Once they were back inside, Kyoran sat with his arm wrapped in bandages. He felt a deep sense of shame for his earlier behavior, repeatedly apologizing for his lack of manners. In his eyes, it was wrong to have someone as important as Taran performing such humble tasks for him. However, Taran quickly dismissed these concerns, reminding the older man that he was no one special. He explained that he was merely a shepherd who didn't even know his own father's identity. Taran then gave him a sharp look, telling him to drop the formalities, which Kyoran eventually agreed to do. Despite this, Kyoran couldn't help but wonder why a wizard of such caliber would choose to live as a shepherd. He clarified that he wasn't trying to be insulting, but the job simply didn't seem to match Taran's obvious power. Taran then revealed that he was simply honoring his mother's dying wish. When Kyoran asked for more details, Taran described the harsh reality of how nobles live at the base of the mountains. He explained that if his true identity were ever discovered, those in power would simply exploit him before tossing him aside. Rather than calling this overprotective, Kyoran surprisingly remarked that his mother had been very wise, which caught Taran off guard. Kyoran admitted that his mother's fears were well-founded. He noted that great power naturally leads to conflict, recalling a devastating war that occurred about 20 years prior between the House of Arabian, which he served, and the Great House of Zahar. The casualties were staggering. Out of roughly 3,000 Arabian knights, over 900 were killed. This meant nearly a third of their force was wiped out. Sadly, Kyoran shared that everyone he loved was part of that loss, including his friend Denver and his own wife and son, all of whom were killed by House Zahar. He agreed that a knight's life can often end more pointlessly than that of a commoner. However, Kyoran pointed out one major flaw in his mother's reasoning. She had underestimated Turan's actual talent. Although he felt embarrassed to say it given his current injuries, Kyoran considered himself a skilled knight, yet Turan had easily defeated a wraith that he couldn't handle. He told the boy that his potential far exceeded that of a knight. He possessed the aptitude of a high-ranking noble. When Turan questioned if his mother had lied about his father being a knight, Kyoran explained that, on rare occasions, a child with noble-level power is born into a family of knights. Because of this, Kyoran suggested that Turan should finally leave his hill and enter the wider world. When asked why he should bother, Kyoran explained that humanity is in desperate need of strong, compassionate leaders. He noted that humans are not the undisputed masters of the earth. Other races, once cast out by the gods, are constantly looking for a chance to reclaim their power. While these external threats remain, the human nobles do nothing but fight among themselves. Kyoran argued that in such a chaotic era, the world truly needs someone with Turan's strength and character. Ultimately, Kyoran asked whether Turan was truly content with his life as a shepherd. Turan looked back at him, questioning what he could possibly gain by leaving the mountain. Kyoran explained that the rewards depended on his own desires, whether he sought wealth, fame, power, or even a sense of community, all things that were difficult to find in his current isolation. He encouraged the boy to imagine a life of wandering to hunt monsters, exploring unknown lands, or perhaps being adopted into a noble house to seek a position of authority. Listening to these options, Turan admitted the man made sense and realized that any of those paths would be more exciting than herding sheep. For the first time, he felt a genuine curiosity about the world beyond the hill. Kyoran worried for a moment that he might be raising the boy's expectations unnecessarily, yet he promised to support whatever choice Turan made. When the conversation shifted to bloodline abilities, Turan asked for clarification. Kyoran apologized, realizing he often forgot how little the boy knew about formal magic. He explained that a bloodline ability is a specific trait inherited from the Freyans, which serves as the primary distinction between nobles and knights. He asked Turan if any particular spell felt unusually easy, or if he possessed a talent that didn't seem to rely on mana. While Turan suggested his physical strength might be it, Kyoran clarified that mana naturally enhances the body of any wizard. Turan then mentioned his exceptional sense of smell and his talent for throwing stones. Kyoran noted that while a superior nose could be a bloodline trait, being skilled with projectiles was a common characteristic of House Arabian. After reflecting on Turan's descriptions, Kyoran eventually announced that he had identified which family the boy's powers most closely resembled. When Turan asked for the name, Kyoran's expression shifted. He revealed that the house was known as the Pursuers or Hunters, the Great House Zahar. This was the very same house that had fought the bloody war against Kyoran's own people. Turan was visibly shaken by the news, looking at the old man with deep sadness because he shared the blood of Kyoran's enemies. He even considered apologizing, though he realized these relatives were essentially strangers to him. Kyoran urged the boy not to look so worried, pointing out that Turan had played no part in that past conflict. He insisted that the war was a matter for the adults of that time, and argued that the cycle of violence would never end if they continued to seek revenge. When Turan asked if Kyoran had any regrets about suggesting he leave the mountain, knowing that seeking power would inevitably lead him to join House Zahar, the old man remained firm. He acknowledged that while Turan's remarkable skills would draw him toward his kin, he ultimately trusted in the young man's good character. When Turan asked for clarification, Kyoran explained that he was referring to the inherent goodness he saw in the young man. He pointed out that Turan had saved his life, even though doing so meant revealing a secret identity he had protected for years. Kyoran mused that if someone with Turan's character were to join House Zahar and reach a position of power, it might actually prevent such devastating wars from happening again. However, he told Turan not to dwell too heavily on the matter, noting that no final decision about joining the family had been made yet. Turan eventually announced that his mind was made up and that he was ready to try leaving the mountain. While Kyoran praised this decision, the boy made it clear that he wouldn't be departing immediately. He told Kyoran that he intended to stay until the older man's injuries had fully healed. Touched by this gesture, Kyoran called him kind and noted that his wounds were really just minor scratches, silently reflecting on what a truly good person the shepherd was. Later, while they were back inside the house, Kyoran began teaching Turan about the nature of magic, explaining that mana is the essential requirement for its use. He mentioned that because of this, mana is often called the key to omnipotence. When Turan questioned the term, Kyoran clarified that despite the name, it isn't a power that can do literally anything. Rather, A wizard must possess mana that matches the specific spell they wish to cast. Turan then asked how one determines if their mana is a match, prompting Kyoran to explain the three main factors that dictate the difficulty of magic: bloodline, affinity, and causality. Starting with the first factor, Kyoran described bloodline as a power determined by one's specific ancestry, which is common among most nobles. He correctly guessed that Turan would find it difficult to heal wounds with magic, explaining that for the Ravista bloodline in the south, such healing comes naturally without any training, because it is in their blood. Moving on to the second factor, affinity, Kyoran described it as a mage's familiarity or preference for certain tasks. Turan realized this was why he could create a fireball so easily. It felt just like throwing a rock. Kyoran confirmed this, noting that a simple flame would never have reached such speed or power without that specific mental connection. Finally, Kyoran addressed causality, calling it the most vital but also the most mysterious of the three factors. To illustrate his point, he asked Turan what would happen if he tried to kill him using mana directly. Turan replied that his head would probably just glow a bit with no other effect. Kyoran explained that this failure is exactly what happens when causality is missing. He noted that magic fails when there is no logical cause for the desired result, or when the intended task is simply too difficult to achieve without a proper foundation. After listening to the explanation, Turan felt he was beginning to grasp the concept. Kyoran explained that to kill someone, rather than wasting mana on a vague wish for death, a wizard must provide a logical cause. He noted that creating and launching a flame is a far more natural process than simply trying to ignite a target directly. Impressed by the boy's quick grasp of the concept, Kyoran remarked that Turan possessed the mind of a scholar, rather than just a mage. When Turan questioned why he could control normal animals easily while magical beasts required a different approach, Kyoran clarified that the presence of mana in magical creatures was the deciding factor. As they spoke, a nearby sheep seemed to eavesdrop on their conversation. Turan admitted that magic was far from simple, but Kyoran reminded him that a truly great mage must understand the principles and context behind their power, not just how to release mana. Curious about his own heritage, the shepherd asked if the Zahar bloodline possessed unique magic. Kyoran confirmed they were experts in tracking and stealth, suggesting that Turan give it a try. Turan agreed and closed his eyes, focusing on the desire to remain undetected by any of the senses. As he wished for his scent and sound to vanish, he began to fade from view. Stunned into silence, Kyoran stood before an empty space and confirmed that the technique had worked perfectly. Although he was impressed, the man felt a wave of sadness looking at the vacant room. As Turan slowly became visible again, Kyoran admitted it had been a long time since he had seen that particular power. He noted that during the war, the Arabian Knights feared that specific ability more than any other. While Turan felt the power seemed unfairly strong, Kyoran insisted it wasn't invincible and offered to teach him proper training methods. Turan pointed out that Kyoran was being remarkably friendly by sharing so much knowledge with a member of an enemy house. However, Kyoran reminded him that Turan had saved his life and cared for his wounds, reiterating that he had full confidence in the young man's character. Later, an unpleasant bald man approached Turan, expressing shock that he was actually selling his flock and leaving the area. He demanded to know who would look after the sheep and complained that Turan shouldn't have made such a choice without asking the community. Turan remained firm, telling the villagers they would have to find a new shepherd on their own. He made it clear that what he did with his property was his business alone, offering to sell the sheep at a fair price or simply set them loose. He warned them that if he released them, they would have a very difficult time catching the animals themselves. The village chief, realizing that Turan was a man of his word, and that provoking him would be a mistake, eventually backed down. He told Turan to do as he pleased and handed over a bag of payment. As Turan and Kyoran began their journey away from the hill, Turan noted that the villagers still hadn't compensated Kyoran for his services, and he considered going back to collect what was owed. Kyoran declined the offer of compensation, insisting that since Turan was the one who actually defeated the beast, he didn't intend to take the credit or the money. Acknowledging this, Turan realized they had reached the point where their paths had to diverge. Kyoran expressed his apologies for not traveling further together, explaining that he simply felt more comfortable on his own. In return, Turan thanked him for everything and shared his hope that they might meet again in the future under happy circumstances. For a long while, Turan stood and watched the older man's figure fade into the distance. It was only then that he truly understood why he had been so insistent on Kyoran dropping the formalities. Despite never lacking love from his mother, he realized he had been secretly longing for a father figure, someone who could serve as a role model and show him the kind of man he ought to become. As his own journey continued, Turan traveled deep into the desert and navigated through a canyon. Scanning the horizon to see how much further he had to go, he eventually spotted a group of people in the distance. Assuming they might be traveling merchants who moved between villages, he felt relieved, thinking he could finally ask for directions. Upon reaching them, a man demandingly asked who he was to block their way. Turan explained that he was traveling solo and politely asked for the location of the nearest city. The men informed him that if he followed the road they had come from, he would eventually reach a city called Muir. However, as Turan thanked them and prepared to leave, one of the men ordered him to stop. He mockingly asked if the boy really expected to walk away for free after receiving help. When Turan asked what he meant, the man insisted that something must be given in exchange for information. The group suddenly drew their blades and ordered him to hand over his bag. When Turan asked if they were bandits, the leader retorted by asking what he would do about it if they were. He told Turan that in a wasteland like this, no one would think it was strange if someone disappeared. Pointing his sword at the boy, the bandit leader told him to hand over his cloak and bag while they were still being nice, as killing him and taking his things would be a messier task. Turan quickly realized he was dealing with murderers. Instead of feeling afraid, he thought back to his training sessions with Kyoran, mentally reviewing every piece of advice the older man had given him. He decided then that he would use these bandits as a way to practice his skills. This caused the group to burst into laughter, mocking him for talking as if he were some kind of wizard. In response, Turan thrust his hand forward, unleashing a powerful gust of wind that sent the men flying through the air. He noted to himself that amplifying and shaping the wind with his hand used significantly less mana than trying to create it out of thin air. He was actually surprised that such a small amount of mana could produce a strike that strong, leaving the bandits completely disoriented and confused by the sudden magical attack. Drawing water from his pouch, Turan began to shape the liquid into a sharp crystal. As more of these icy projectiles formed around him, the bandits realized they had made a grave error in judgment. One man was killed instantly when the crystals impaled him. Despite the success, Turan critiqued his own magic. He felt that while this spell was intended for areas with plenty of water, simply hurling stones with his sling still seemed faster and more powerful. Terrified, the bandits begged for mercy, claiming they never would have attacked had they known he was a wizard. However, this was merely a distraction. While the leader spoke, the rest of the group tried to sneak up on Turan from behind. Anticipating the move, Turan stomped his foot onto the ground, causing pillars of sand to erupt beneath the hidden attackers. The leader stood frozen in shock as he watched his entire crew being impaled by the earth. Turan told the man he had one question, and the desperate leader promised to answer anything. The boy wanted to know why they had attacked so recklessly, noting that a lone traveler could easily be a dangerous wizard. The bandit explained that it was because Turan had bowed his head. Despite their rudeness, the boy had been polite and respectful, which led them to assume he was just an ordinary person. Turan thanked the man for the useful lesson, and the bandit smiled, hoping he might actually be spared. As water began to gather ominously above the man's head, Turan recalled a specific warning from Kyoran. The older man had told him that he would meet many people, but he must never show mercy to scum like bandits. Kyoran had argued that people who harm others for profit would never hesitate to do so again, and a life spared out of pity might eventually lead to the suffering of 10 innocent people. Understanding this logic, Turan killed the man and reflected that he had spent enough time on the matter. Following the clear wheel tracks left by the bandit's cart across the desert sand, Turan couldn't stop thinking about the fact that he had just taken human lives. Although he felt a heavy sense of guilt, he knew he couldn't have let them go. Just as tracks in the desert eventually vanish under growing weeds, the chaos in Turan's heart slowly settled as he focused on Kyoran's teachings. Finally, he arrived at a new world, the city of Muir. It was nothing like the small village where he had grown up. Standing above the city, he admired its beauty and was amazed by the crowded streets, noting that he had never seen so many people in one place. The architecture was entirely foreign to him, making him feel as though he had truly reached a proper city. He eventually approached a shopkeeper who greeted him warmly, but Turan explained that he wasn't there to buy anything. Instead, he remembered Kyoran's advice. Upon reaching a city, the first thing a traveler should do is find an inn to rest. The shopkeeper told Turan to leave if he wasn't planning on buying any fruit. This rudeness confused the young man, who wondered if it was a common city rule to buy produce before asking a simple question. To test this, he pointed at a fruit and inquired about the price. The merchant informed him it cost 2 dupit, but quickly realized Turan was an outsider when the boy asked what a dupit actually was. The man explained that other coins were acceptable as well, so Turan handed over a payment and asked for directions to a place to stay. The merchant then pointed him toward the largest inn in the city. Upon his arrival at the inn, a staff member named Lena greeted him warmly, even commenting on his good looks. When Turan asked about the nightly rate, she told him it would be 16 dupit. He agreed to stay, but mentioned he had a further question regarding whether there were any monsters in the area with active bounties. Lena seemed surprised by the inquiry. Internally, Turan was thinking about Kyoran's advice. Hunting monsters was not only a way to earn money, but also the primary method for absorbing mana to grow stronger. When Lena didn't immediately answer, Turan pressed her for a response. She eventually explained that nothing in life is free and made him buy a drink before providing more information. She told him to visit City Hall, but had to explain what it was after realizing Turan was truly from the countryside. She described it as a place where officials employed by the local lord handle public business. Since it was already dark, she suggested he go the following morning if he wanted to find a monster bounty. Lena then asked if he was a monster hunter, which prompted Turan to ask for a definition of the term. Lena explained that some people believe an ordinary person can turn into a wizard by hunting monsters. She mocked anyone who believed such a superstition, but Turan questioned if it really was just a myth. Suddenly, a man named Midin placed a hand on Turan's shoulder. Midin, a monster hunter himself, insisted that killing monsters to become a wizard was a proven fact because he had witnessed it personally. Although Lena was shocked to see him alive, Midin declared he wouldn't die until he achieved his goal of using magic. After Turan politely moved the man's hand, Midin apologized for the intrusion. Turan expressed interest in hearing more about the transformation process. Midin explained that because wizards gain strength by hunting, it stands to reason that a normal person could eventually cross that threshold. He revealed that his group of 4 was currently hunting for that exact purpose. When Turan asked if any of them had successfully become a wizard yet, Midin admitted they hadn't. He noted that in this city, the only wizards were the Lord's personal mage and 3 others serving under him. Midin observed that the boy's equipment seemed too worn out for hunting and inquired if he even carried a weapon. In response, Turan held up his sling. Midin noted that it clearly saw a lot of use based on its condition. Turan explained that the tool was effective for quickly launching projectiles about the size of an egg, leading Midin to suggest that he could easily use it to hunt monsters like foxes or rabbits. Mentioning that their group was looking for an additional long-range attacker, Midin invited Turan to join them, but the boy politely declined the offer with a smile. Later that night, while resting in his room, Turan reflected on the day's chaos and decided there was no real reason to hunt with the group. He found it hard to believe he had actually left his village and felt a sense of uncertainty about what lay ahead. Suddenly sensing someone outside, he remembered Kyoran's warning that cities are not inherently safe and that he must stay alert. With his hand charged with mana just in case, he cracked the door open and asked Lena why she was there. She asked if he was already asleep and suggested she could stay to keep him warm, as she thought the room might be chilly. When Turan asked for clarification, Lena smiled and began to take off her clothes, telling him the offer was exactly what it sounded like. The confused boy pressed her further, so she explained that she would do whatever he desired for a small fee. He then asked what would happen if he wanted nothing at all, but she accused him of lying, claiming she could read his true desires on his face. However, Turan remained completely unmoved, causing Lena to stare at him in surprise. He recalled Kyoran's stern warning never to fall into such honeypots. The older man had cautioned him to be extremely careful with women at inns and prostitutes, noting that many carried diseases. While wizards had strong natural resistance to illness, Kyoran had warned that a careless mistake could lead to passing a disease to a future partner, advising him never to let temporary desire lead to regret. Reflecting on his experiences with both the fruit seller and now Lena, Turan concluded that city life was quite harsh. He was struck by how people attached a price tag to even the smallest bits of information or conversation, viewing the urban environment as rather cold-hearted. His thoughts were interrupted when he overheard Midin and his companions talking nearby. The men were questioning why Midin had tried to recruit Turan, arguing that the boy didn't look helpful. Midin's allies agreed, adding that since the boy seemed so overconfident, he would have made the perfect bait to use during a hunt. Midin explained that he felt a connection to the boy, who reminded him of his own younger self. He believed that by keeping Turan close, The boy might have a better shot at surviving a bit longer, though his companions teased him for being far too kind-hearted. Overhearing this, Turan smiled to himself, reconsidering his earlier thought that the city was entirely cold and indifferent. The following morning, Turan visited the city hall, where an official approached him to offer assistance. When Turan questioned if the man was indeed an official, the man sarcastically asked who else he could possibly be. The young shepherd then stated his intention to hunt monsters, a claim that clearly confused the worker. Turan recalled Curran's previous warning that the world wouldn't be particularly nice to him. However, he looked at it from a different perspective, noting there was no inherent reason for people to be kind. He remembered the advice that if he truly wanted respect, the solution was simple. Revealing his identity as a wizard would make ordinary people bow to him instantly. The official handed Turan a document, but specified that he couldn't take it with him. He had to read it and return it immediately. When Turan asked if the target was a blade crow, the man mockingly asked if it looked like a cat instead. He explained that any slain monster must be brought back to the city, so a wizard could disperse its mana and prevent it from becoming a wraith. He issued a stern warning that abandoning a monster's corpse was a crime punishable by execution under city law. Turan, well aware of the dangers of wraiths, understood he could not afford to repeat his past mistakes. When Turan asked why knights weren't handling the monster hunting, the official explained that they were far too busy maintaining order within the city walls. He noted that dealing with beasts in the wild was a task left to thugs and outsiders. As Turan departed, the man muttered that the boy would likely just become another body piling up outside the city. However, Turan later returned carrying a dead monster with a massive hole through its chest. The sight left everyone speechless and in total disbelief. The officials crowded around, asking how he had killed it alone and managed to return so quickly. Turan confirmed he had done it by himself and asked for his payment. After the official hurried to fetch a bag of coins, the staff marveled at the corpse, noting how incredible it was that even the wings were perfectly intact. They wondered how a blade crow could be brought back in such pristine condition. When the official noticed Turan was still waiting, he asked why he hadn't left yet. Turan simply inquired if there were any other high-value monsters available to hunt, leaving them stunned that he planned to head back out immediately. Later at the inn, Lena served Turan the most expensive items on the menu, admitting she never imagined someone like him could take down 30 monsters in only 3 days. She commented on the small fortune he must have earned from the bounties, but Turan, eating heartily, replied that money wasn't his primary motivation. His real objective was the monster's mana. He reflected on how much stronger he had become, noting that his magical reserves had grown several times larger than they were when he first met Kioran. Despite his recent growth, Turan sensed that he was reaching a plateau, realizing that it would be difficult to increase his strength much further by only absorbing the mana of weak monsters. Shifting his focus to the meal, he asked Lena if she had taken a bite of his food, but she reminded him that he had finished the entire plate on his own. She joked about how much he could eat despite his thin frame, while the chef expressed his satisfaction that Turan had enjoyed a dish he hadn't prepared in a long time. Turan's peaceful meal was interrupted as he stood to leave. One of Midden's companions grabbed his coat, mockingly asking if he was really eating such expensive food all by himself. The men taunted him about the small fortune he had supposedly earned from his bounties and suggested he should share some charity with his partners. In response, Turan punched the man in the face, sending him stumbling back, and dryly asked if he wanted any more help. When another man grew angry and swung at him, Turan easily dodged and struck him as well. A third man tried to attack with a chair, but Turan blocked the blow and ended the scuffle by simply flicking the man's forehead. Lena, becoming increasingly anxious, shouted at them to stop brawling inside the inn. Later that day, Midden approached Turan to apologize for his men's behavior, explaining that he had given them a stern scolding. He promised it wouldn't happen again, admitting that they had been struggling financially and simply felt jealous when they saw Turan's success. After Midden ordered the two men to apologize, which they did, Turan asked if things were truly that difficult for them. Midden confessed they were at their limit and probably wouldn't be able to cover their room fees, though he insisted it was their own problem to solve. Surprisingly, Turan handed over a bag of money. When a confused Midden asked why, Turan explained that it was repayment for the kindness Midden had shown him earlier by worrying about his safety and trying to recruit him. Midden was shocked that Turan knew about those intentions, but Turan reminded him that nothing in life is free. He expected information in exchange for the gold. Midden laughed, asserting that sharing information was his specialty, and promised to tell Turan everything he knew. Sometime later, Turan stood outside the city and reflected that this would likely be his final hunt in the area. Thanks to Midden's surprisingly thorough insights, he felt it was time to move on to his next destination. He thought highly of Midden, noting that while he wasn't as experienced as Kyoran, his lack of cynicism made him a purer and kinder person. Suddenly, a familiar scent caught Turan's attention. He began to run toward it, desperately hoping his intuition was wrong. As he pushed into the jungle, he noticed deep gouges on the trees. His fears were confirmed when he found one of Midden's men bleeding out from a massive chest wound. Looking further, he discovered Midden's lifeless body on the ground, surrounded by the very coins Turan had given him, now soaked in blood. Looking down at the scene, Turan was struck with disbelief by what had happened. He found one of the men still clinging to life, and as the survivor struggled to speak, he managed to whisper a single word: "Rabbit." Turan was initially confused by the mention of such a creature, but the dying man clarified that they had been attacked by a rabbit monster. Turning his gaze, Turan saw the beast still feasting on the remains of another companion. The monster, noticing his presence, glared at him with glowing red eyes. The creature suddenly charged with incredible speed. Turan managed to leap out of the way just in time, watching as the beast slammed into a tree and obliterated it instantly. Realizing how close he had come to being hit, Turan quickly readied his sling. He fired a stone that magically split into 3 as it flew through the air, but the monster effortlessly deflected each one. Turan noted that the beast seemed well-versed in defending against projectile attacks. As the rabbit monster prepared for another dash, it was startled when Turan suddenly vanished into thin air. Confused by his disappearance, the monster halted its attack, only for Turan to reappear behind it and plunge a dagger into its neck. Turan immediately retreated and used his magic to turn invisible once more. The monster lunged at the spot where he had been, but it only succeeded in cutting down a tree. Driven to a frenzy, the creature began blindly slashing at every tree in sight. Eventually, exhausted and losing blood, the monster let out a final scream and collapsed. Turan's strategy of baiting the creature into a rage had worked. After canceling his invisibility, Turan approached the carcass and extended his hand to absorb its mana. He noticed the energy was far more potent than what he had gained from the leopard monster he first encountered. The surviving man, watching in awe, realized that Turan was actually a wizard. When asked why he kept his identity a secret, Turan ignored the question and instead asked if there were any personal belongings he should return to the men's families. The man began to cry, explaining that none of them had families, and looked at Midden's body with deep regret. Turan's thoughts shifted to a previous conversation he had with Midden about a great nearby city called Orem. Midden had described a place there called a library, which housed thousands of books. Turan remembered how his interest was immediately piqued at the mention of so much knowledge. When he had asked how to gain entry, Midden explained that access was restricted, with rumors suggesting that only wizards were permitted inside. Recalling this, Turan told the dying man that he had made up his mind. He was going to head to that great city. After burying the men and standing over their graves to wish them peace, Turan finally turned and walked away. A short time later, he found himself waiting in a long line to enter the great city of Orem. He felt a bit embarrassed reflecting on how he had been so easily impressed by the smaller city of Muir, as the sheer scale of Orem made its predecessor seem tiny by comparison. The massive crowd trying to gain entry was something he had never imagined, and he observed the guards with curiosity, wondering if they were scanning the masses for criminals. It was clear that a city of this size operated with a much more sophisticated security system. When he reached the front, the guards blocked his path. When Turan asked what the issue was, they informed him that he couldn't enter in such a filthy state, advising him to at least clean the dust off his clothes. Eventually, he made it inside, and was immediately struck by the sight of a colossal tower. Recalling Midden's stories, he realized this had to be the library. The building was so overwhelming that Turan was certain it could only have been constructed using magic. Upon reaching the entrance, Turan told the guards he wished to go inside, but they flatly stated that the facility was reserved for wizards. When he claimed to be one of the guards became furious, accusing him of a crime. The guard insisted that a mere boy could never be a wizard, and began to charge his hand with mana as a threat. Turan remembered Kyoran's lesson that mages can recognize one another by sensing the strength of their mana. Deciding to use this, he released a massive surge of power. The guard was so terrified by the intensity of Turan's mana that he collapsed to the floor, realizing the boy was no ordinary magic user, but someone of noble rank or higher. The guard, trembling, introduced himself as Kenya, a knight of House Valtas, and asked which house Turan represented. Turan asked if disclosing his lineage was a requirement for entry, to which Kenya replied it was not. However, he explained that using the library required the master of Valtas's permission and offered to contact the house on Turan's behalf. Turan could only sigh as he realized the process was becoming far more complicated than he had expected. Soon, he found himself in a bathhouse being scrubbed by maids, wondering how his simple request for a book had led to this. When he asked if he could just wash himself, the maids explained that they would be punished if they failed to serve such an esteemed guest properly. Relenting, he told them to proceed, which they accepted with gratitude. During the bath, one of the maids accidentally blurted out that he was amazing before quickly covering her mouth in embarrassment. When Turan asked if there was something wrong with his face, she begged for his forgiveness, admitting she had been distracted by how handsome he was. He told her there was nothing to forgive, though the maids scolded him for speaking so casually to them given the difference in their social status. Suddenly, a young girl entered the room and expressed her shock, remarking that he looked like a prince now that he was clean and well-dressed, a far cry from the beggar-like guest who had arrived earlier. Her bodyguard quickly reminded her that such comments were inappropriate. Turan introduced himself to the girl, who in turn presented herself as Zila. When she inquired about which noble house he belonged to, Turan explained that personal reasons made it difficult for him to disclose that information. Though she called his secrecy a shame, Zila decided to play a prank on him to force his hand. She began releasing her mana until it filled the entire room, intent on seeing how Turan's own energy would react. Turan immediately felt the overwhelming weight of her power crashing into him, but he didn't back down. Instead, he released his own mana to counter hers, and the two auras clashed with such intensity that the room began to tremble. A guard quickly stepped in to shield the maids from the spreading pressure. After a tense moment, both of them retracted their energy. Zila, clearly impressed by the results of her test, looked at her trembling hands and laughed. She then took Turan completely by surprise by asking if he would like to marry her. Stunned into silence, Turan could only stare at her until she teased him for his reaction, assuring him it was merely a joke. However, before leaving with her bodyguards, she urged him to reconsider, noting that the seat beside her was currently available. As she walked away, Turan noticed his own hands were shaking. He realized her strength was at least equal to his, leading him to wonder if such power was common among the people of this city. The story then moves to a different room where Rug Valtas, the Lord of Orem, was waiting. Welcoming Turan as a young noble, Rug asked if Turan was already familiar with his name. After Turan introduced himself, the Lord asked if his goal was to use the library. Rug wanted to manage Turan's expectations, explaining that despite the many rumors, the library contained no ancient magic or secret ways to boost one's mana. Turan clarified that he wasn't looking for anything of the sort, which seemed to satisfy the Lord. Rug granted him permission to enter, noting that the library held no sensitive information regarding his house anyway. Since it was getting late, he suggested that Turan rest and return the next day. Turan accepted the offer, expressing deep gratitude for the man's kindness. The following morning, the guards at the entrance verified Turan's pass and welcomed him into the Sky Library as an honored guest. As Turan pushed open the massive doors and stepped inside, he was met with a breathtaking sight. The library spiraled upward, as if it were endless. Just as he was beginning to grasp the true scale of the place, a nearby voice called out his name in greeting. Upon turning around, Turan found a young girl standing behind him. She introduced herself as the librarian and explained that acting on the Lord's instructions, she would outline the basic rules of the facility. Turan was quite surprised to discover that a child held such a position. Raising a finger to emphasize her points, she informed him that any damage to the property must be paid for and that books were strictly prohibited from leaving the building. Furthermore, she noted that she would be monitoring him throughout his entire visit. Feeling a bit uneasy under her close watch, Turan asked if she could give him some space while he read. He also inquired whether she had read the collection herself, to which she replied that locating specific information was her specialty. She then offered several reading suggestions, ranging from history and romance to more adult topics, leaving Turan momentarily speechless. When he finally clarified that his goal was to learn basic common sense about the world, the librarian's professional demeanor wavered in surprise. However, she moved with impressive speed to gather a large stack of volumes for him. While noting that many ancient texts might be too outdated for his needs, she pointed him toward a more helpful section. After thanking her, Turan carefully opened a book and began to reflect on the nature of these objects. He soon became absorbed in his studies, and his expression shifted as he realized how incredible the information was. This became his daily routine. He spent his days in the library, gradually piecing together a map of the world's geography and the diverse races inhabiting it. He studied the complexities of wizard etiquette, the manufacturing of various goods, and the details of monsters and ancient relics from the old empire. What had once been a vast, unknown void in his mind was slowly replaced by a clear and vivid understanding of reality. Eventually, Lord Rugvaltus approached Turan and observed that he had been making full use of the library's resources. Turan agreed, but the Lord quickly pivoted the conversation. He explained that while Turan was being treated as a noble, granting him access to the library had been an extra act of kindness for which he now expected a favor in return. Without hesitation, Turan asked what was required of him. Rug described a dangerous monster to the north of Orem that had been preying on travelers. He revealed that 4 knights sent to deal with the threat had been killed and eaten. Although a noble was needed for the task, the Lord claimed his house could only spare 2 people at the moment. Believing that protecting the innocent was the duty of a wizard, Turan agreed to assist. Nevertheless, he felt a lingering suspicion, as he knew that most wizards typically avoided getting involved in such matters. Rug emphasized the urgency, noting that the northern road was a vital trade route that had been obstructed for 10 days. Turan suddenly realized that the trouble had started even before he arrived in the city, leading him to conclude that the Lord's goodwill in opening the library had likely been a calculated move to recruit him for this hunt. The scene transitions as a large party departs from the city. Isella couldn't help but comment on her father's actions, questioning if they were truly so unreliable that he had to recruit a guest for a monster hunt. While she clarified that she wasn't blaming Turan specifically, she felt the Lord was making an unnecessary fuss. The man walking alongside her laughed, asking if calling the Lord fussy was crossing a line, which prompted Isella to tell him to be quiet. This man then paused to introduce himself to Turan as Marvin Valtas, expressing his excitement about their collaboration, a sentiment Turan politely returned. As they continued their trek, Isella expressed her desire to finish the task quickly so they could return home to rest. Marvin leaned toward Turan and whispered an inquiry about whether he had any romantic interest in his older sister. When Turan immediately said he did not, Marvin looked visibly relieved. Their conversation was cut short when the lead guard suddenly ordered everyone to halt upon discovering a wrecked carriage blocking the road. While inspecting the debris, the guards discussed whether the creature was responsible. They reasoned that since northern travel had been restricted from their side, the victims must have approached from the south before being ambushed. Turan remained silent, focused on a specific mark on a piece of wood. He eventually concluded that their target was a monkey. When Isella questioned this with doubt, Turan pointed out a distinct handprint. He explained that the beast had attacked the peddlers before retreating into the woods, suggesting that they could find it by tracking its trail. Isella admitted she had little skill with tracking magic and asked Marvin if he could help, but he also lacked the ability. Stepping forward, Turan volunteered to try and began searching through the carriage remains. Isella wondered aloud if he belonged to a specialized tracker bloodline, but Turan simply picked up a scrap of fabric, explaining that he was just very used to this particular method. Closing his eyes, Turan caught the scent from the cloth and activated a search spell. When he opened his eyes, a glowing blue energy trail became visible to him, leading him to point the way into the forest. The trail eventually led them to a river, where Turan noted that the creature seemed to have washed itself. Isella found it hard to believe a simple animal would wash on purpose to hide its scent, but Turan suggested it might have just felt like cleaning up. Suddenly, the blue lines reappeared in Turan's vision, and he shouted a warning that the beast was right behind them. A giant monkey monster with glowing red eyes emerged from the trees, letting out a deafening roar. The beast raised its hands, which were clutching massive boulders, prompting the knights to scream for everyone to get out of the way. The monster hurled the stones with such incredible speed and force that anyone in their path was sure to be severely wounded. Although Turan managed to dodge the assault, he was stunned by what he saw next. Instead of dodging, Isella and Marvin used the knights as human shields to protect themselves. Once the initial attack ended, Isella heartlessly tossed aside the heavily injured knight she had been holding. Turan finally understood that his mother's warnings about the world had been correct all along. As the chaos unfolded, Isella screamed for the remaining knights to launch an attack. The soldiers who were still standing rushed toward the beast, which turned to flee. Seeing this, the knights immediately gave chase. Meanwhile, Turan calmly prepared a small stone for his sling. Although Isella and Marvin were running after the monster, they struggled to keep up with its superior speed. Isella began to worry they would lose their target, but her words were cut short when a projectile whistled past her so fast she couldn't even react. The stone flew through the air, piercing the monster's body and leaving it screaming in agony. Turning around, the siblings saw Turan walking toward them, casually spinning his sling as the creature collapsed. Seizing the moment while the beast was incapacitated by Turan's strike, Isella extended her hand to deliver the finishing blow. An immense torrent of fire erupted from her, taking the shape of a dragon as it surged toward the helpless monster. Unable to move, the creature could only watch as the flames hit, causing a massive explosion that completely obliterated it. Watching the display, Turan realized he was witnessing the famous pyromantic bloodline ability of House Valtus. With the threat finally neutralized, the knights were at last able to breathe a sigh of relief. Isella looked at Turan and admitted that the speed of his shot had actually given her chills. Marvin teased his sister, asking if she had been scared, but she quickly told him to be quiet, claiming he was the one who had screamed like a young girl. Marvin, in disbelief, denied ever making such a sound. While the nobles bickered, the knights were busy tending to the wounded. The scene was grim. Many had broken limbs, and one veteran shouted for more bandages to help a man whose arm had been blown off. Another soldier struggled to stop the bleeding from a head wound, prompting suggestions to apply medicine immediately. Surveying the aftermath, Turan reflected on how messy the situation had become. He noted that while they were lucky no one had died in the surprise attack, the serious injuries could have been avoided entirely. He glanced at Isella and Marvin, considering that their mana-enhanced bodies made them significantly tougher than the common knights. Despite this advantage, they hadn't hesitated to use those weaker than them as human shields. When Marvin noticed Turan staring and asked if something was wrong, Turan simply replied that it was nothing. Isella then called him over, noting that it was time for the most important part of the hunt, absorbing the mana. Turan joined the siblings as they gathered around the monster's remains, and as he raised his hand to begin, he reflected on how the information in the library's books was proving to be exactly right. Despite multiple people absorbing mana simultaneously, the efficiency of the enhancement remains unaffected. Isella was the first to stop, venting her frustration over reaching her personal growth limit so quickly and grumbling about her lack of progress. Marvin hit his own ceiling shortly after, yet Turan continued the process without any sign of stopping. Watching him, Isella began to understand why her father had insisted on his presence. She was deeply impressed by his mastery of spells and a mana capacity that already matched her own, especially considering he was a noble who hadn't even peaked yet. As the sun began to set, the party made their way back to the capital. Marvin praised Turan for the success of the mission, arguing that they would have failed without his tracking skills and the decisive blow that grounded the beast. Turan, however, dismissed the compliments, insisting his performance wasn't particularly special. He expressed regret for not detecting the creature sooner, admitting he hadn't anticipated the monster possessing its own search ability. This revelation surprised Marvin, who asked for more details. Turan explained that certain powers seemed to manifest based on a monster's physical mutations. He noted that the monkey's oversized eyes and hands suggested it had evolved the strength to hurl objects and the sight necessary to peer through the thick forest. Marvin was amazed by Turan's quick analysis, but Turan simply credited a monster encyclopedia he had consulted at the library. Marvin scoffed, calling the library a boring, abandoned place. Isella added that she had once visited out of curiosity, but found the text so dense that she couldn't even finish half a book. When Turan suggested she ask the librarian for simpler recommendations next time, Isella was genuinely puzzled, asking if such a person even existed there. Her reaction left Turan feeling quite confused as he parted ways with them. Upon returning to the library, the girl greeted Turan by his name, which immediately made him realize he had been inattentive. He reflected on how no knight or commoner would ever address a noble so informally, as everyone in the city used respectful titles. Furthermore, her appearance didn't quite fit the image of a typical librarian. When he asked how she knew who he was, she smiled and asked if he was just now noticing the discrepancy. She explained that she had seen his name on his entry permit and claimed that her vision extended to every corner of the library. When Turan inquired about how to address her, She admitted she didn't have a formal name and told him to choose whatever he liked. She playfully suggested a romantic pet name, but Turan firmly decided to stick with librarian. She teased him for being so stiff, pointing out how awkward it was for him to be polite now after spending days giving her various tasks. Turan denied ever being demanding and asked her to keep her distance, finding her proximity overwhelming. Finally, when he asked if she was a wizard from the old empire, she revealed that she had never been human at all. She explained that she was a type of spirit and asked him if he thought the role suited her. The spirit explained to Turan that while a soul inhabiting a living being creates a living spirit, her situation was different. Since she inhabited something neither dead nor alive, she was simply a regular spirit. Essentially, the library itself was her true form, and her human appearance was merely a tool for comfortable communication, tailored to the user's subconscious preferences. When she teased him about his specific tastes, Turan told her to stop making things up. She insisted she was like a reflection in water, which prompted Turan to test her nature. He reached out to touch her, but his hand passed right through her body. The spirit commented that his touch felt strange and complained about her inability to physically interact with intruders. She expressed her frustration, noting that if she had the power, she would personally punish anyone who dared to steal books. It became clear to Turan that House Valtes was unaware of her existence. She clarified that until he arrived, no one had possessed the high-level type required to perceive her. Her creator had designed her to be visible only to those with a sufficiently complete nature, a fact she found quite romantic. When Turan asked for a definition of type, she explained that it was simply what wizards referred to as a bloodline. When Turan asked if she could identify his own heritage, she suggested he talk to his parents, only for him to reveal that he was an orphan. Curious, the spirit offered to examine him if he gave his consent. Before Turan could fully understand what she meant, she laughed and thrust her hand directly into his chest. Though it didn't hurt, Turan was stunned by the sight of her ghostly arm passing through him. She laughed at his reaction and noted that they were now connected. Examining his core, she confirmed that while he had several small traits, his primary bloodlines were those of the pursuer and hunter, which Turan identified as the traits of House Zahar. However, the spirit discovered something else. Turan was of mixed heritage. She explained that he was the offspring of two different bloodlines, though she couldn't identify the second one because it was currently locked. She assured him that such a phenomenon wasn't rare in mixed lineages, and that it would likely reveal itself as his power grew. This revelation made Turan think of his mother. She had always seemed too refined and educated for a commoner, leading him to wonder if she was a descendant of a noble family whose bloodline had become too diluted to hold significant mana. Grateful for the insight, Turan thanked her, and she playfully suggested he stay for another month as a show of appreciation. From that point on, Turan no longer studied in solitude. He used the spirit as a guide, asking her to explain complex concepts from the books and questioning the existence of invisible substances in the world. The librarian shared ancient knowledge from plundered texts that had vanished millennia ago. She taught him that by looking through floating water, he could see things hidden to the naked eye. Turan viewed these lessons on the laws of nature as an invaluable treasure. He began to understand the true cause of things, how microorganisms cause disease, how germs lead to decay, and the basic principles of light refraction and friction-generated heat. He even grasped the biological processes behind how living creatures get injured and eventually heal. Turan began to experiment with the concept of decay, finding that a single touch could cause an apple to rot almost instantly. When the librarian inquired about his progress, he described the results as incredible. He noted that while standard magic could produce similar effects, understanding the underlying scientific principles allowed him to achieve them with a much smaller amount of mana. This shift in how he perceived the world significantly enhanced his efficiency as a wizard. He wondered aloud if powerful noble houses were hoarding such knowledge to maintain their superiority, as widespread access to these facts would likely erase their competitive advantage. The librarian remarked that the general level of human knowledge seemed to be declining over time, and admitted she now understood why. Eventually, Turan announced his departure, noting that the lord of the city had been dropping obvious hints that it was time for him to move on. Distraught, the spirit of the librarian begged to go with him and tried to embrace him, only to pass through his body and tumble to the floor. She confessed she was bound to the library and could not leave, pleading with him to stay so she could look after him. Turan gently declined the offer. Though she huffed in disappointment, she encouraged him to search the world for the legacies of the gods, suggesting he might find other spirits with even greater knowledge than hers. Turan promised to visit occasionally, and while she was clearly saddened by his exit, he smiled and noted there were still many books left for him to study. Guided by a map he had acquired from the library, Turan left the city and set his sights on the Inral Desert, the territory of House Zahar. He hoped to find information regarding his parents there, but decided not to rush. He reasoned that if the clues had survived for 18 years, a few more days would not make them disappear. Throughout his journey, he maintained his training by hunting monsters and absorbing their mana. While traveling through the forest, the sudden neighing of a horse caught his attention. He discovered a majestic, saddled horse that appeared to be protecting a man lying on the ground rather than attacking him. One of the attackers nearby called the horse a demon, frustrated by the strength of what he assumed was a pet monster. Turan watched the struggle, trying to determine if the horse itself was the primary target. He soon realized the attackers were two dark elves. One urged the other to find a weakness in the horse's defense, though the second elf complained that it was a nearly impossible task. To create an advantage, one dark elf unleashed a wave of purple energy, causing monsters to rise from the earth. Turan recognized this immediately as the dark elf necromancy he had read about in his studies. Initially, Turan hesitated to intervene, wondering if the fallen man had been the original aggressor. However, his hesitation turned to horror when he saw one of the dark elves casually eating a human arm. When the first elf asked for a piece of the meat, the second told her to find her own, assuming she had already helped herself to some. Disgusted by the realization that he was witnessing cannibals at work, Turan knew he could no longer stand by and watch. By activating his stealth magic, Turan faded into invisibility, while the female dark elf complained that the men she had killed were far too hairy. As her male companion prepared to finish his meal, Turan struck with such lethal speed that the elf died instantly, leaving the woman no time to react. With his death, the monsters he had summoned vanished into thin air. Panicking at the sight of her fallen ally, the female elf ordered her remaining beasts to swarm around her for protection. Turan launched a stone at her, but one of the monsters intercepted the projectile with its horn. Frustrated and unable to see her opponent, she demanded to know who was there, commanding her buffalo monster to charge and trample the nearby trees. The elf realized her attacker was hidden by magic and vowed to expose him. She summoned a wolf-like creature that released a glowing orange aura, which effectively neutralized Turan's stealth and forced him to become visible. Upon spotting him, she labeled him a demon and ordered her pack to kill him. Turan quickly generated an explosion of flames by rubbing his hands together. While the blast incapacitated the wolf, the buffalo remained unscathed. The massive beast rushed him, and Turan barely managed to scramble out of the way, falling to the ground in the process. He realized that the monsters were incredibly fast and felt relieved that he had already eliminated one of the two elves. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through Turan's leg as the wolf bit down on him. He managed to kick the creature away and stand up, but before he could locate the other monster, the buffalo slammed into him at full speed. The impact sent him flying into a tree, causing him to cough up blood as he slumped to the ground, surrounded by the elf and her beasts. Laughing at his misery, the dark elf told him he got what he deserved for killing Kel and promised to make him beg for death. However, her taunting was cut short when the horse suddenly struck her in the head. The elf screamed as her skull was crushed, and the horse continued to trample her. Her monsters turned their attention back to the horse to save their master, giving the elf a moment to recover. She hissed about the humiliation and swore to kill Turan, but he launched another attack that connected perfectly, blowing her head off and killing her instantly. With the second elf dead, the remaining summons disappeared, and an exhausted Turan collapsed. He realized just how much the struggle had drained him. The horse approached and nuzzled him, prompting Turan to offer his thanks. Later that night, the unconscious blonde youth woke up by a campfire and jumped in surprise when he saw Turan sitting across from him. Turan told him that he was finally awake and explained that he had intervened after seeing the dark elf ambush. When the horse walked over, the boy petted her and called her Tilly. Turan remarked that Tilly was an exceptional animal, noting how she had not only protected her master but also moved him to safety. The boy introduced himself as Aziz of House Berg and thanked Turan for his life, leading Turan to share his own name. When asked why the dark elves had attacked, Aziz explained that there was no specific reason. They had simply been ambushed without provocation while he was on a pilgrimage with his retainers. Deeply moved to tears, Aziz admitted that while he had heard rumors about the savagery of other races, he never imagined they could be so cruel. As he sobbed for his fallen companions, he explained how precious they were to him. When Turan inquired if they were his family, Aziz clarified that they were the knights and servants who had accompanied him on the pilgrimage, many of whom had practically raised him from childhood. Observing his grief, Turan concluded that Aziz was a remarkably good-hearted person. Turan then asked if Aziz knew the total number of attackers, mentioning he had already killed 2. Aziz believed that accounted for all of them. To be certain, Turan activated his search spell to scan the area, confirming that no other dark elves were lurking nearby. Curious about Turan's own journey, Aziz asked if he had any pressing matters to attend to. Turan explained that he too was in the middle of a pilgrimage. Aziz expressed his amazement that a lone traveler could possess such strength, questioning if Turan was the scion of a great house and why he was wandering without companions. Turan found the question difficult to answer directly, modestly claiming he wasn't that powerful and only won because he ambushed one elf and had the horses help with the other. To gauge each other's strength, Turan released his mana, prompting Aziz to do the same. Turan was stunned to discover that the blonde youth possessed an incredible amount of mana. In fact, without the recent energy he absorbed from the dark elves, Turan would have had less than Aziz. For his part, Aziz deduced that Turan's raw power was high enough to withstand 2 necromancers on its own. He suspected Turan was a noble from a potent bloodline who hadn't even reached his full growth potential yet. Seeing an opportunity, Aziz invited Turan to House Berg since the traveler had no fixed destination. He promised to repay Turan for saving his life if he would safely escort him home. When Turan asked about the nature of this repayment, Aziz grinned and explained that Houseberg were famous enchanters and vassals of the northern great house, Arabian. He boasted that his family had crafted magical tools for generations and promised to create a masterpiece worthy of Turan's skills. After some time had passed, the two moved deep into the woods to bury the subordinates killed in the ambush. Aziz sighed with a mix of relief and sadness, noting that the ordeal was finally ending. He admitted he wished he could send the bodies back to their hometowns, though he knew it would be a difficult task. Turning to Turan, he offered his sincere thanks. When a puzzled Turan asked what he was being thanked for, Aziz hesitantly explained it was because Turan hadn't mocked him. He felt it was pathetic for a noble to cry over the deaths of his servants, but Turan questioned why he would think such a thing was shameful. Aziz replied quietly that it was simply what his father had always taught him. Aziz shared the lessons he had been taught, that those who perish in a righteous war find a place in the heavenly palace alongside the gods. According to his upbringing, mourning their loss was considered a sign of weakness, as a true noble must move forward by standing upon such sacrifices. However, Aziz confessed his own doubts, feeling that if being unable to grieve a family member's death was the definition of strength, he might never truly be strong. Turan listened quietly before a warm smile crossed his face. He gently reassured Aziz that his feelings were a sign of kindness rather than fragility. Taken aback by the response, Aziz decided to lighten the atmosphere. He suggested they speak more informally since they would be traveling together, noting that their age gap didn't seem too wide. Turan gave a small nod of agreement. With a friendly grin, Aziz raised his hand and expressed how much he looked forward to their new partnership as friends. Turan paused for a moment, quietly repeating the word friend to himself, before reaching out to shake hands and reciprocating the sentiment. After traveling for a while, Aziz suggested they take a break. During the stop, Turan noticed a box on the ground and asked about it. Aziz opened what he called a cold storage chest, which was filled with wine and food from their last city visit. He explained that the interior stayed cold enough to preserve most items for about a week, though the food could be reheated later. Aziz then enthusiastically showed off several other magical devices, such as a tool that produced water at the push of a button, one that built a shelter from gathered wood, and an alarm system to detect approaching strangers. He even gestured to his own clothes, proudly noting they were enchanted to clean themselves. Turan was clearly impressed, remarking that such rare magical items were remarkable. He even commented that a single set of such clothing would be worth the price of saving a life. Aziz laughed, insisting his life was worth far more, and promising to reward Turan with even better treasures once they reached his family estate. He vowed that if his house wouldn't provide them, he would craft them himself. Shifting the conversation, Aziz mentioned he had lost count of the various spells Turan had used during their journey, listing everything from animal control and freezing to lightning strikes and terrain transformation. He curiously asked if Turan had spent his entire life practicing, or if he possessed a unique bloodline ability that allowed him to master any magic. Turan narrowed his eyes, keeping to himself the fact that he simply had a natural talent for it. He reminded Aziz of their agreement not to pry into family secrets. Aziz quickly laughed it off as a joke, admitting that such a powerful bloodline probably didn't even exist. He then moved on to the topic of age, guessing that Turan didn't look over 30, but wondering if he might secretly be 80 years old. Turan revealed that he was actually turning 18 later that month, a confession that left Aziz completely stunned. Aziz revealed that he himself was turning 43 this year, though he eventually chuckled and remarked that a 25-year age difference wasn't particularly important for friends like them. Aziz crossed his arms, remarking that he should have realized Turan possessed enough magical strength to defeat 2 wraith sorcerers. He admitted he hadn't expected to find 2 geniuses of that caliber in the world, which prompted a curious Turan to ask who the second person was. Aziz explained that the other individual was a close relative with an extraordinary bloodline, identifying this other prodigy as his own cousin. When Turan inquired if he could commission her to create magic tools, Aziz clarified that it wasn't possible because she belonged to the main house. He further explained that she was a princess of Arabian and a potential future leader of a great house. As they continued their walk, Aziz detailed the unique succession customs of the great houses. Unlike typical wizard families, leadership isn't simply handed down to the head's children. Instead, because these houses include dozens of relatives from the same generation, the position usually goes to the strongest member, who is often more powerful than the leader's direct offspring. However, among the current head's children, a girl named Mesa was born with unparalleled talent. After awakening her power, she mastered all forms of combat magic in a mere decade. Turan was impressed to learn that, at just 21 years old, her house's full support had already elevated her to the level of their core members. The conversation turned to how she acquired such power at a young age. Turan asked if the family had held a funeral recently, and Aziz confirmed his suspicion. He explained that when their eldest granduncle passed away, Mesa had devoured his magic power, though the rest of the family received portions as well. This made it clear to Turan exactly why the great houses were able to maintain their absolute supremacy. Eventually, Aziz pointed toward the horizon, noting they had nearly reached the Deccan Plains, which served as the central territory for Arabian. Upon arriving at Zevelin, the seat of House Berg, a woman rushed out of the mansion to demand an explanation for what was happening. Aziz cried out for his mother and embraced her, bursting into tears, a reaction that made Turan reflect on the fact that Aziz was 43 years old. A bearded man approached and sternly told Aziz to maintain his dignity and address her more formally. After apologizing, Aziz introduced Turan as a new friend from the south who had risked everything to save him, stating flatly that he wouldn't be alive without him. His mother was shocked, noting that the pilgrimage route was supposed to be safe, but her concern turned to fury when Aziz revealed the dark elf ambush. She labeled them filthy wretches and threatened to mobilize an army to destroy them. The bearded man, addressing her as the head of the house, urged her to stay calm in front of their guests before turning to Turan to ask which house he represented. Turan, however, politely replied that he was unable to disclose that information. When the man questioned his reluctance to name his house, Turan confessed that he honestly didn't know his own lineage. He explained that he was raised by a commoner mother and had no knowledge of his father's identity. Aziz was stunned by this revelation and asked why Turan had kept it a secret, to which Turan simply replied that his background wasn't exactly something to brag about. Despite his mysterious origins, the head of House Berg declared that Turan would be appropriately rewarded for saving her son's life. She initially suggested arranging a stay at the city's best inn rather than the mansion, which frustrated Aziz. His mother explained that while they would normally host him, an important guest was currently staying with them, making it difficult to house a stranger of unknown background. However, a voice suddenly interrupted, telling the aunt not to worry on her account. The speaker argued that someone who had saved Aziz was unlikely to turn into an assassin. A woman dressed in black appeared, whom Aziz immediately recognized as Mesa. When he asked what had brought her there so unexpectedly, Turan observed the Princess of Arabian, privately thinking she looked as pale and drained as a corpse. Mesa revealed she was in hiding after a narrow escape from an assassination attempt by the vermin of House Zahar. Aziz was horrified that such an attack could happen at the heavily fortified main house and asked if there was a traitor involved. Mesa confirmed his suspicions, noting that loyalty was a rare commodity in the main house. After bidding everyone good night, she retired to her room, prompted the head of Hausberg to change her mind and instruct her maid, Ina, to prepare the second-best guest room for Turan. The following morning, Turan woke up in the luxurious guest suite. While walking through the hallway after his rest, he ran into Aziz, who remarked on Turan being an early riser. When asked what he was looking at, Turan pointed to a magic lantern on the wall. Aziz mentioned that he made those frequently for practice and offered him one, though Turan admitted his interest wasn't that deep. Suddenly, a violent flash of lightning illuminated the entire hallway through the windows. Aziz explained that the display was just Mesa practicing her magic, noting her constant diligence. Turan inquired if he was witnessing the Arabian bloodline magic, and Aziz confirmed it was the power of the Storm bloodline. While Aziz insisted he didn't hate his own family's traits, he admitted to feeling envious of Mesa, remarking that she seemed to be evolving into a literal god. Turan found himself curious about the sheer strength of the next Arabian leader. Although Aziz invited him to go take a closer look, Turan hesitated, suggesting it might be unwise for a suspicious outsider like himself to approach her. Aziz brushed off these concerns, arguing that Turan clearly wasn't an assassin. He insisted he would personally vouch for him, and admitted he was actually dying to find out which of the two, Turan or Mesa, was truly the stronger wizard. Turan remarked that he suspected a desire to test his strength was the real reason Aziz had brought him there. With a laugh, Aziz confessed that he had actually been nursing a grudge for a few years and simply wanted to see Mesa humbled for once. The two then made their way to the training grounds, where Aziz called out to Mesa. When she turned and inquired about his companion, Turan introduced himself. Recognizing him from the previous night, Mesa asked what had brought them to the arena. Aziz suggested they join her for some practice, just like old times, but Mesa mockingly reminded him of the last time they trained. He had stormed off in tears because she mastered a spell in 2 tries that had taken him an entire week. Turan couldn't help but laugh at the story, though he quickly apologized when Aziz asked if he was joining in the mockery. Turning back to Mesa, Aziz declared that Turan possessed unparalleled magical talent and proposed a duel between them. Mesa repeated the word, duel, while staring silently at Turan, her eyes suddenly glowing blue as a massive surge of mana erupted from her. The sky turned dark above them, and a terrifying lightning storm descended, making Mesa appear like a literal monster. Under the crushing weight of her power, Turan's body stiffened, and his eyes widened in shock. By the time she finished releasing her energy, he was left panting and drenched in sweat. After a brief silence, Mesa bluntly stated that while she hated to say it, she didn't believe Turan was any match for her, and that a duel would be pointless. Despite her dismissive comment, Turan remained focused and determined. Aziz stepped in with a wide grin, admitting that while Turan might not equal her in raw power, his ability to learn magic was what truly set him apart. Placing a hand on Turan's shoulder, Aziz proclaimed him a genius, unlike anyone he had ever met, even questioning if Mesa herself could reach that level of natural talent. Intrigued by the high praise, Mesa agreed to see what Turan could actually do. Turan then proposed a specific challenge. They would each demonstrate a spell the other likely didn't know, and the winner would be whoever could replicate the opponent's magic faster. Aziz thought the idea was excellent and asked for Mesa's opinion. Knowing that Turan hadn't yet mastered his own bloodline magic, Mesa decided it would be unfair to use her innate storm abilities and agreed to leave them out of the contest. Taking the lead, she stepped onto the training ground and tapped the stone floor with her foot. A small sprout immediately burst through the rock, rapidly growing into massive vines that snaked across the courtyard. Aziz let out a terrified shout as the plants wrapped around him and hoisted him high into the air. While Aziz dangled upside down, Mesa focused on Turan, identifying her technique as the magic of plant creation and control. She challenged him to replicate it, ignoring Aziz's frantic pleas to be released as he grew increasingly dizzy. She found his predicament far too amusing to end just yet. Turan, meanwhile, began to analyze the fundamental principles of the spell. He reasoned that if fire magic was just the manifestation of combustion and water magic was the extraction of moisture from the air, then these vines followed a similar logic. Crouching down and pressing his palm against the stone, he realized that the magic didn't truly create something from nothing. Instead, it forced existing seeds to sprout at an unnatural speed. With a pulse of bright blue mana, he commanded the ground to grow, and in an instant, a burst of blue vines erupted and obeyed his every thought. Both Aziz and Mesa were stunned. Mesa recognized that Turan had independently grasped the true essence of the spell. When she asked if he had encountered the technique before, he admitted it was his first time seeing it. She huffed, noting that for once, Aziz's praise had actually been accurate. Finally releasing her grip on the magic, Mesa let Aziz tumble to the ground where he lay groaning in pain. She then stood firm and told Turan it was his turn to set a challenge for her. Turan briefly considered using his Zahar bloodline magic, but immediately dismissed the idea as far too dangerous. Searching for an alternative, he reached toward the tall grass until a small rat emerged and ran toward him. Mesa watched with skepticism, asking if simple animal control was the best he could offer. Holding the struggling creature tightly, Turan explained that the rat was merely a necessary ingredient for his spell. As blue energy began to pulse around his hand, he drained the animal's life force, leaving only a withered, dry husk behind. Mesa took the challenge seriously and used her own magic to summon a second rat. However, despite her efforts to mimic Turan's technique, the animal remained unharmed. She closed her eyes to concentrate, realizing that this was no ordinary spell and wondering about the secret behind it. Watching the grim display, Aziz asked why Turan would choose such a revolting form of magic, to which Turan admitted it was simply the first thing that had crossed his mind. He watched Mesa curiously, wondering if even a prestigious family like the Arabians lacked an understanding of this particular principle. When Aziz suggested she should just admit defeat since the spell wasn't working, Mesa snapped at him to be quiet, refusing to believe she was incapable of mastering such a complex element of magical causality. The efficiency of magic increases significantly when the intended effect aligns with natural processes. A spell typically succeeds if the caster clearly understands the cause behind the phenomenon and provides an adequate supply of mana. In this process, the ability to perceive the underlying cause is a vital factor, as it determines both the success rate and the amount of energy required. One can compensate for a lack of causal understanding by pouring in a massive volume of mana to make up for the inefficiency. This was the approach Mesa took. She commanded the rat in her hand to rot while it was still living. Following a sharp shriek, the animal's skin withered away, leaving behind a mummified husk identical to the one Turan had produced. Aziz noted the success, and a weary Mesa huffed, confirming she had managed to do it. However, a wave of intense exhaustion suddenly hit her, blurring her vision until she collapsed. Aziz cried out her name and rushed to her side, with Turan following closely to examine her unconscious form. Turan initially wondered if the spell had simply drained too much of her mana, but he realized that merely depleting energy doesn't usually cause someone to faint. At most, it should only lead to extreme physical weakness. Upon inspecting her hand, he identified the true problem. She was suffering from a severe lack of basic nutrients. After lifting her up, Turan asked Aziz if there were any mages with healing bloodlines nearby to help, but Aziz confirmed no one like that was available. Consequently, Turan instructed Aziz to have water, salt, and the adults brought to the ladies' room immediately. As he carried her, he was struck by how light she was, noting that she felt more like a lamb than a person. It was clear that she had exhausted even the tiny amount of mana she had been using just to keep her malnourished body standing. Sometime later, Mesa regained consciousness in her bedroom, just as her aunt rushed in, frantically calling her name and checking if she was awake. When Mesa asked why she was there, her aunt explained that Aziz had reported her sudden collapse during training with their guest. The woman suspiciously asked if the stranger had done something to her, but Mesa quickly defended him, insisting it was entirely her own mistake. Suffering from a throbbing headache, Mesa asked everyone to leave. Before exiting, her aunt placed a bowl of soup on the bedside table, gently reminding Mesa that while she relied on magic, she still needed to care for her health and eat at least a little. Once alone, Mesa whispered a soft thank you and picked up a spoonful of the warm soup. However, the taste triggered a traumatic memory of her mother and sister being attacked. She could still hear them pleading for her to save them, fueled by their belief in her power. Overwhelmed by the memory, Mesa groaned in pain and accidentally dropped the bowl, which shattered against the floor. While she struggled to regain her composure, Turan was escorted to the Berg family basement. There, in a space that served as the temple of the limping goddess, he stood in the golden light and found himself staring at a massive, winged statue. A guard clad in black drew his blade and pointed out to Turan that the surrounding walls and doors were perfectly solid, lacking even the smallest crack. He compared the structure to muscles that had been conditioned for centuries, advising Turan to abandon any thoughts of a break-in before dismissing him. This man was identified as Harem Berg. Turan calmly assured him that such an idea had never crossed his mind, yet Harem pressed closer, repeatedly insisting on how incredibly sturdy the prison was. Turan couldn't help but wonder if the guard was simply trying to brag about the facility's construction. Suddenly, Harem executed a lightning-fast strike with his longsword, an action Turan followed closely with his eyes. When Turan curiously asked what he was doing, Harem explained that he was simply training. Turan watched intently as the guard moved with a rhythmic flow, performing a sequence of strikes and footwork where not a single motion was wasted. Every gesture seemed to be the perfect, minimal preparation for the next surge of force. Turan found himself impressed, questioning if this was the peak efficiency of a truly disciplined body. Noticing the stare, Harem halted his practice and looked at Turan, who immediately apologized for the interruption. Harem brushed the apology aside, and leaning in very close to Turan's face, demanded to know what he had observed in those movements. Turan honestly described the display as incredible. Stepping back, the guard remarked that most nobles looked down on martial arts, preferring to use magic from a distance. He argued that this was because their bodies were weak and their minds lacked the discipline to control their physical forms, leading them to rely on simple magical tricks instead. Turan countered that, unless a noble belonged to a lineage specialized in physical power, such as the Hercules strength bloodline, focusing on magic was generally a more practical choice. However, he admitted that one eventually faces trials where avoiding direct confrontation is impossible. Hearing this, Harem held out his sword and told Turan to take it. Although Turan questioned the wisdom of giving a weapon to a suspicious prisoner, Harem laughed it off. He claimed the weapon was merely a piece of iron and that the wielder's body was what truly made it a sword. He confidently added that Turan's weak frame wouldn't be able to cut him anyway. As Turan gripped the hilt, he contemplated what he could actually achieve with the blade. Suddenly, his entire body was engulfed in a massive, radiating aura of blue mana and flames. With intense power surging around him, Turan held the sword firm and met Harem's gaze directly. Harem looked at him and immediately objected, saying it was wrong and telling him to stop feeding mana into the weapon. Turan gave a simple acknowledgement and pulled his energy back under control. Harem moved in closer and began correcting Turan's stance with his own hands. He told him to place more weight on his front legs and drive it downward so the ground could carry the impact. He pointed out that Turan's elbow was lifting too high and warned that elbows that weak would never control the sword's burden. He added that if he kept moving like that, an enemy would end up driving a blade straight through his thigh. He told Turan to lift his arm and ordered him not to decide his own limits. Turan answered with a firm, "Yes, sir." Harem gave a nod, said that was better, and ordered 10 more repetitions. He told him not to break his breathing, and instructed him to send each breath straight into his muscles. The veteran guard watched him and judged Turan to be an excellent vessel, thinking that, if possible, he needed to find time to squeeze every last bit out of that body. Harem stated that mana was nothing more than cheap tricks. He said wizards wrongly believed physical strength came guaranteed, but in truth, that was only the bare minimum their bodies could do. He told Turan that a body trained the right way could rip through a battlefield without relying on mana, and insisted he needed to grasp that difference. Turan breathed hard from the strain and said he would remember it. Then, without warning, his eyes shifted as the temple's heavy doors opened and Spotsasize's mother stepped into the room. She lowered her head deeply and asked for forgiveness, telling Turan she had committed something unforgivable against their benefactor. Turan stayed calm and suggested that he was the one who owed an apology, assuming the young lady had not been harmed. As a guest, his behavior had crossed the line. The head of House Berg explained that Mesa wanted to offer him a proper apology and asked whether he had any free time. Later, Turan found himself alone with Mesa in a grand parlor. She stood beside a tall window and remarked that the whole matter was troublesome, saying she had heard he had been kept inside the temple because of her. She apologized for causing such needless disturbance. He walked toward her and said it had been necessary, making it clear that he was only relieved she was safe. She looked at him and asked about the magic from the day before, especially the one that caused animals to rot, wondering whether it was some hidden bloodline spell. She said the mana cost had been absurdly high and asked if he had lied to her about it. Turan denied it and explained that if she understood the principle behind it, she should be able to use it easily too. She let out a quiet sound and noted that it seemed he had no intention of teaching it for free, but if he refused to reveal the method, there is no proof it isn't bloodline magic involved. Turan said he did not especially care whether he won or lost. She looked confused and asked what he meant, saying that if things ended this way, it would make her look bad as the Princess of Arabian. She offered him a deal, proposing that if he revealed the secret behind that magic, she would teach him one of Arabian's hidden arts in return. Turan smiled and said he had no problem with that. He began to explain the logic, saying that the root of it was bio-enhancement magic. He asked whether she had used microorganisms too small to be seen, and she confirmed that she had. She was stunned, realizing that the efficiency had been so high because she had not known about those hidden factors. She let out an annoyed sigh and admitted that the loss was hers. Even though she had come out on top at the end of their duel, it had only happened through brute force. Turan suggested that he had counted that as part of the wager, but Mesa said that was not right. She argued that when judging magical skill, reckless amounts of mana being poured out were not supposed to be included. A little embarrassed, she asked whether he could tell Asus it had been a draw, because she did not want to see Asus become arrogant over a win. Turan understood. She then decided to give him his compensation and picked up a comb. She showed it by rubbing the comb against a surface and explained that when objects scraped together like that, they started to pull toward each other. She looked at Turan with confidence and began explaining the reason, but he cut in and stated that it was static electricity. Her face went completely blank with shock as she asked if he had already known that, and Turan confirmed that he had. She muttered that this alone was considered one of their fairly deep secret arts, and told him she would have to think harder about how to repay him, since she now needed to find something he did not already know. She suggested that until she came up with proper compensation, the two of them should train together from then on. She quickly added that it was only to repay her debt, not because she had any special desire to keep him around. Turan gave a warm smile and agreed, suggesting that starting the next day, they should meet in the garden in the evening. The scene shifted to a huge dining hall packed with an enormous amount of fine food. Asus's mother told him the table was nothing much, but still asked him to eat until he was full. Asus looked at the feast and asked why she had prepared something so grand, noting that he had not seen food like this even on his birthday, and adding that anyone who saw it would think the Lord of Arabian himself had come to visit. The mother told him to be quiet. Turan looked over the table and saw at once that there was nothing ordinary about the meal. The head of the house then turned back to him and brought up the matter they had discussed earlier. She asked whether it was true that her son had promised a powerful magic tool as the price for saving his life. Turan confirmed that it was. The mother then asked if Turan had anything specific in mind. He said he wanted something meant for defense. He explained that using magic to injure others was simple, but using it to protect oneself was far harder. If possible, he wanted something that could also guard against sudden attacks. The mother said she had made similar items before, so creating one should not be difficult. Still, she noted that they did not have anything prepared right away. Asus then spoke up and asked whether he could make the item for Turan, but his mother immediately shut that down, saying that if he planned to drag Hausberg's honor through the mud, he needed to stop. Asus's brother Milo raised his hand and said he would make it instead, explaining that he had just completed a commission from the main house and currently had free time. The mother asked how he planned to create it. Milo explained that for protection against surprise attacks, the best choice would be something Turan could keep on him at all times. He said he would pour mana into jewelry such as rings, earrings, or necklaces, and build in a function that could draw out the defensive power of a guardian bloodline. The mother accepted that answer and asked how long it would take. Milo replied that he needed 1 month. The mother remarked that although nothing looked worse than a parent praising their own child, Milo was already a capable wizard, not far behind her in skill. Turan then understood how serious the gift really was, thinking that a magic tool crafted over a full month by the head wizard's family was far beyond what he had expected. He spoke up, showing his gratitude, but wondered if it was too much. The mother asked whether he truly thought it was excessive, then asked if that meant her son's life was worth so little. To her, it was not excessive at all. She then ordered Turan to remain as a guest in their house for the next month. She told him to treat the place as his own and stay in comfort. The following morning, Turan and Asus walked through the busy streets of Zavilan. Asus noted that his mother seemed to have taken quite a liking to him. He admitted that before going to sleep, he had spoken to her more about Turan, mentioning both his talent and the fact that he never neglected his training. He revealed that at first, she had wanted to look down on him as nothing more than a wandering noble with no support behind him, but that opinion had changed. Turan observed that it sounded like she was trying to recruit him into their house. Asus confirmed it, explaining that she liked to give generously, place people in her debt, and then present a beautiful young woman as temptation afterward. He mentioned that several adults in the house had entered that way. Turan noted that this was a troubling method. Acis told him not to worry and said the magic tool was simply a pleasant way to win his favor. He assured Turan that he would not be pushed into marriage even if he accepted the magic tool, insisting that his mother was not so lacking in class. He then asked what Turan planned to do with the rest of the day. Turan explained that he had promised to train with Lady Mesa in the evening and asked whether something was wrong. Once he heard it would only be in the evening, Acis said there was still plenty of time left before then. He pulled Turan toward another part of the city and told him to come patrol with him instead. He promised that Zavalan might not be the capital, but it still had more than enough to enjoy. He even joked about whether Turan had really intended to lock himself away in some corner and practice magic on a day like that. Turan admitted that he actually had. Acis told him life was too short to waste without enjoying it, and dragged him along. Acis first took Turan to a casino filled with roulette tables and card games, but Turan turned it down. Later, they went to a lively bar for drinks, and once again Turan refused. After that, the two wandered through the city market. Then Turan suddenly stopped and fixed his eyes on the posters hanging across a wall. His eyes widened in shock as he stared at the drawn face and thought of corn. He asked himself whether it could really be that same corn. Not long after, they went to watch a play where swords clashed as the story unfolded. It told of the year 2195, when the warriors of Arabian marched into that demon desert. It also told of a knight named Korn, who defeated the enemy with the help of God after a fierce battle. At the end, both Turan and Acis applauded. Acis asked whether it had been worth watching, and Turan answered that it had been very good. He remembered Korn once claiming he was nothing more than an ordinary knight, and thought that his humility had no equal. He made a silent promise that one day, when he met Korn, he would ask whether that story was truly real. Early the next morning, Turan opened his eyes and found Harem staring straight at him. Harem asked whether his body had rested well. Turan said yes and asked what had brought him there. Harem said that from what he had seen the day before, Turan's vessel was quite impressive. He declared that it was time to harden the body and ordered Turan to follow him. Turan asked whether they were going to train, and Harem answered that the body never grew stronger by lying around, only by being forged through effort. He then asked Turan whether he did not want that. Turan agreed to go, thinking that he would gain more from it than from wasting time in play. At that moment, Acis suddenly burst into the room shouting Turan's name and saying that he had heard there would be an incredible performance that day. The moment he saw his uncle Harem Berg, he froze in surprise. Harem looked at him and said they were heading off to train. He then told Acis that he also needed to temper that weak body of his and asked whether he would join them. But Acis stepped back with fear all over his face and quickly lied, saying he had only just returned and had not recovered yet. Then he turned and fled at full speed. Turan watched him run off and wondered why he was acting that way. He soon learned the reason when he was thrown into a brutal weightlifting session. Harem stood over him while Turan pushed up enormous plates. He told him not to listen to his body's screams and demanded one more rep. Turan let out a strained groan. Harem scolded him, saying that if he gave in after so little pain, then his mind was already being ruled by the weakness of his body. He ordered one final repetition as Turan's muscles shook violently. At last, Harem said it was enough and allowed him to stop. Turan dropped to the floor, dragging in breath. Harem asked if he was tired, and Turan could only gasp that he was. Harem told him he was lucky, because as a wizard, doing this once would be enough. Turan wondered whether it was different for someone who was not a wizard. Harem explained that an ordinary body weakened again over time, even after being tempered once, so it needed constant hardship to keep its strength. But for wizards, mana kept the body in its best state, so once it was forged into steel, it did not decline. He smiled at Turan and declared that he must be fully rested by now. Turan stared at him in shock and tried to say he was still exhausted, but Harem's face darkened as he said he knew Turan's body would not lie. He shouted that Turan had rested enough and that now he would teach him weapon combat. Turan cried out in pure exhaustion as the training grew even harsher. The days that followed at House Berg were truly full. He rose early each day to train with Harem in a special space where the body became several times heavier than normal, and one wrong move could leave a person pressed into the floor. In the evenings, he returned to the mansion and continued magic training with Mesa. She taught him how to create electricity through friction between the fingers, while golden sparks snapped between her hands, and before he realized it, 3 weeks had gone by. Turan attempted to launch a bolt of lightning at a target, but it missed. Mesa watched from behind and remarked that he was having more trouble than expected. Turan smiled and said it was because he was not from Arabian. She admitted that helping him was difficult for her as well, since she had never imagined aiming lightning magic in that way. She asked whether it would not hit simply by firing it, but Turan explained that it was harder than it seemed. Then someone suddenly called out to Lady Mesa, and a man approached them. The man looked at Turan and asked who he was. Mesa turned a cold gaze on him and said it was none of his concern, then asked why he had come. She reminded him that she had already told the main house that no one was to approach her while she was recovering. He revealed that the patriarch had summoned her. She asked what it was about and told him to answer quickly, warning him to prepare for punishment if the reason was trivial. The knight revealed the emergency, announcing that dark elves had been causing widespread destruction across the south. He reported that 3 cities had already fallen and that the main house would soon gather an expedition force. Mesa ordered the messenger to inform them that she would return shortly, and the messenger bowed, accepted the command, and left. She then turned to Turan and told him that she believed she had to go. She paused for a moment and reflected that before leaving, she should collect payment for Turan's foul decomposition magic. A sudden idea came to her, and she clapped her hands. She looked straight into Turan's eyes and asked whether he knew that electricity also flowed through the human body. Turan was caught off guard by the question, and asked whether electricity could truly move through a person's body, which drew a smirk from Mesa. She declared that there was no way he would know, since this was one of House Arabian's secrets. She proposed treating his debt as settled if she taught it to him properly, saying that it would definitely help him a great deal, and Turan agreed. Mesa began explaining the core theory, telling him that when a person saw or felt something, that part of the body sent a tiny electrical signal to the brain. She explained in detail that if the signal came from the eyes, it moved from the eyes to the brain, and if it came from a smell, it traveled from the nose. Turan closed his eyes and focused, tracing those paths in his mind. He realized that a tiny electric signal really did run through the entire body. If he could speed up the signals moving along those paths, he would be able to achieve something remarkable. He concentrated even harder on that faint current. Then, when he opened his eyes again, he could clearly perceive those signals. A butterfly drifted through the space between them, and he saw its movement in slow motion, with far greater detail than before. Mesa asked whether he had managed it and how it felt. He was amazed, wondering how such a thing worked and what exactly it was. But the strain hit him at once, and Turan gasped while clutching his forehead. Mesa let out a soft laugh at his success and explained that he felt that way because he had spent his mana far too carelessly. She mentioned that it would be difficult to control for now because of the headache, but once he became used to it, he would be able to keep it going for quite some time. Turan reflected on the worth of the technique and said that no matter how he considered it, the lesson felt far too valuable compared to what he had given her. She slowly rose into the air and told him to think of it as a simple investment, since he seemed to have talent. She added that if he learned an even more incredible spell in the future, she would collect all of it back, along with the debt he owed her now. She vanished into the distance while he stood there, watching her leave in silence. The scene then shifted to the center of Morgan, deep in the heart of the Dacian plains, where the knights and wizards of Arabian had gathered. A huge crowd of locals filled the area, cheering with cries of glory to Arabian and long live Arabian. Acis remarked that even though it was only a departure ceremony for a dark elf hunt, the mood felt more like a celebration of victory because of the crowd's passion. He suddenly spotted Mesa on horseback and began waving his arms, calling for her to look his way. His father quickly grabbed his arm and told him to control himself like a proper noble. Then someone suddenly shouted that the head of the house was entering. A tall figure moved through the sea of cheering people. Turan looked at the man and recognized him as the current head of House Arabian, known as Battle Arabian. He observed that the head of the house looked far from healthy and asked Acis whether he was always that pale, wondering if his condition might be failing. Acis recalled the rumors that the Lord had once been badly wounded while fighting the head of House Sahar, but since that had happened long ago, he guessed it might simply be the weight of old age. Battle Arabian then raised a hand toward the sky, and as the people looked at him and then upward, the blue above them darkened at once as storm clouds gathered. A huge burst of golden lightning tore through the clouds with a deafening crash. The common people began praying to the Lord of Thunder to protect his descendants. Turan lifted his eyes to the sky and understood that this was the true power of Arabian. Even with his body in such poor shape, The man easily covered the entire area, displaying the absolute peak of magic a human could reach. With firm resolve, Turan thought that one day he would stand at that level too. Sometime later, back inside the workshop of House Berg, Milo held out a leather-bound metal bracelet and said it was ready. He explained that simply wearing it would raise physical stamina a little, but once mana was poured into it, that level would rise even further. Milo went on to say that at its maximum, it could reach a standard close to the nobles of the Guardian bloodline, though he warned that it consumed a large amount of mana and should not be kept active for too long. Turan held the magic tool and declared it a truly remarkable treasure. He noted that something like this would be rare even among the great houses, and called it an exceptionally fine item. Acis's mother then spoke his name and asked whether he had any interest in formally joining their house. Turan stayed respectful and said he was deeply thankful for the offer, but believed that would be difficult. The mother let out a sigh and remarked that she had already heard enough stories from Acis. She reflected that since Turan had many things he needed to do, settling in one place would not suit him well. She told him to think of her offer as nothing more than the lingering attachment of an old woman. Turan lowered his head and said he would never forget the hospitality he had received. He said that Acis and the Berg family would remain his friends forever. She gave a nod and said that was enough. As Turan got ready to depart and leave the house, Harem Berg and Acis came to see him off. Harem tossed a blade toward him and told Turan to take it. He explained that it was a magical tool without any major function, but added that it was durable and the edge was very sharp. Turan accepted the weapon and thanked his master. The word master clearly pleased Harem. A stern, broad smile spread across his face and he turned away. Acis then stepped forward and threw a heavy cloak over Turan's shoulders. Turan asked what it was, and Acis reminded him that he had once seemed jealous of his clothes. He explained that it was a shirt and a pair of pants turned into magic items, ones that resisted dirt and could repair themselves if only lightly damaged. Turan smiled at him, and Acis told him that he had become a real friend, not only because he had saved his life, but because spending time with him and watching how he lived had given him a lot to think about. He then asked where Turan intended to go next, and Turan answered that he would head east first. Acis mentioned that Carmen lay in that direction, then shook his head and warned him that if he could avoid it, he should stay off ships. He complained that the waves were truly terrible, so bad that even wine glasses ended up dancing. Turan smiled to himself, knowing he would eventually have to face those waters to reach the land of Zahar in the Elril Desert, though he kept that to himself. Acis told him that someone that stubborn would never starve anywhere, then told him to return safely and repay him someday for the cloak. Turan answered yes and left. He began his journey through the tall grass. As he walked alone again with a large bag on his back, he reflected on that solitude. He decided to test the results of his training. Turan activated his movement magic and took a single step. He moved so quickly that no one could even see him. To others, it was nothing more than a sudden gust of wind passing by as he continued forward. He crossed an enormous distance, moving through villages and cities and rushing across forests. After a long stretch of travel, he finally stopped. He had reached a jungle and stood there looking up at a mountain when a smell reached him. At first, he thought it was the scent of a campfire, but he quickly understood that it was far worse, something closer to burning flesh. His eyes widened as he reached the source. He stepped into a ruined town and was stunned by what he saw, with shattered remains and broken wood scattered across the ground. He moved through the town and found rows of mutilated corpses of men tied to posts. He wondered whether bandits had done this, because the dark elves should not have reached a place this far out. He scanned the area around him, and while checking the remains of a ruined building, he noticed something. It was the entrance to a basement. He moved toward it and looked at it, certain that this was the place. He seized the basement doors and pulled them open. He peered into the darkness, and what he found there stunned him. A young girl sat curled in the corner, crying and screaming in fear. He jumped down, raising one hand and telling her to wait, making it clear that he was not an enemy and had come to help. The girl lifted her tear-filled eyes and asked if he was telling the truth. He answered yes and asked whether she could tell him what had happened, while the child cried and said that a wizard had killed everyone. Turan asked if she meant a wizard, but before she could continue, the girl collapsed from exhaustion. He picked her up and thought that, thankfully, it did not seem serious, as she was likely only worn out after being trapped there for so long. He decided that getting the child somewhere safe had to come first. As he began carrying her out, an arrow formed from solid blue mana was aimed straight at him. A group of warriors had surrounded him, and among them stood a young female wizard with a magic bow, glaring at him with fury and calling him a murderous bastard while ordering him to kneel. But Turan remained standing there with the unconscious child in his arms, unable to understand what was happening. He stood motionless in the burned remains of the village, still holding the child carefully as the group led by the blonde female archer closed in around him. The female archer drew back the string of her shimmering blue mana bow and shouted for Turan to get on his knees at once. She stared at him with raw hatred, calling him a damned murderer. Her voice shook with anger as she demanded to know whether this massacre had not already been enough for him, saying that he was now even trying to kidnap a little girl, and warning him not to move another step. A knight standing behind her began forming fire magic and threatened that if Turan moved even a little, he would kill him, though his hands trembled as he fought to control the energy he was gathering. Turan kept his composure and told them to wait, explaining that what they were seeing and assuming was nothing more than a misunderstanding. Then, all at once, the nervous knight lost control of his magic completely and accidentally unleashed a huge stream of flames straight at Turan and the young girl. A thunderous blast tore through the area, hurling a column of fire and smoke into the sky. The woman turned and screamed at the man named Gil, calling him an idiot because there had been a child standing there, while Gil panicked and tried to explain that it had been an accident, saying he had simply been so tense that he lost control. Then she noticed something and lifted her eyes as the smoke began to clear, and the sight before them left them stunned. Turan was still standing there without a single injury on either himself or the child, both of them protected by the glowing blue shield formed by his bracelet. He looked down at the magic tool and quietly noted to himself that he had not expected to use it this soon. The knight stood frozen in shock, asking whether he had truly blocked the magic with nothing but his body, and how he did not even have a single burn on him. The blonde woman wondered what kind of defensive spell he was using, or whether it was some special bloodline power. Turan answered in a cold, firm tone that he was not the one who had attacked the village, repeating that the whole thing was a misunderstanding, but his patience had reached its end, and he warned them that if they attacked him again, he would not limit himself to defense next time. Confronted by the sheer weight of his mana, she lowered her bow and dropped her hostility, thinking that his words made sense, since there was no reason for someone to cause such a disaster and then stay behind just to save a child. The archer introduced herself as Bison and asked for his name, so he told them he was Turan. Bison said that even if the situation pointed another way, she still found it hard to trust him completely. Turan pointed at the child in his arms and suggested they ask her for the details once she woke up, adding that she seemed to have seen the real culprit. Bison looked stunned and repeated the point, asking if the girl had actually seen the arsonist, while Turan frowned in confusion and asked what she meant by arsonist. Bison was taken aback by his ignorance and asked if he really did not know who the arsonist was, and Turan replied that he did not. She then explained that the arsonist was the mad mage responsible for this atrocity. For several months, that killer had been attacking remote villages from time to time, tying up the residents and burning them alive. She revealed that because there had never been any survivors, they did not even know whether the culprit was a man or a woman, and that all they knew was the name people had given this person, the arsonist. Before long, the little girl woke up and confirmed Turan's innocence to the group, telling them that the attacker had worn a red cloak and had a rough, messy beard. She said he had looked terrifying, more like a lumberjack than anything else, and after hearing that, the group finally understood their mistake and felt deep shame for attacking someone innocent. Bison and the others lowered their heads, saying they were sorry and admitting they had acted rudely because they had been too impatient. She told Turan that pointing a weapon at him had clearly been her fault, and Gil said he was sorry as well. Turan looked at them and thought that even among nobles, some allowed duty to outrun reason, remembering that Midin had been an honest and capable leader. He then looked back at the group and told them that since their greatest concern had been the child's safety, that was what mattered, and he forgave them. After that, he asked whether they had originally come there to capture the arsonist. Bison said yes and explained that they had arrived just after a new fire, and when they saw him, they believed they had finally found the culprit, though things had clearly not turned out that way. She stated that now that they finally had a proper description, they would catch him soon, because one of their group was a natural tracker. Turan grew curious about that person and asked her to explain. Since they had brought a tracker with them, he asked whether they were from the Zahar family and what they were doing in a place like that. Bison quickly raised her hand and answered that they were not from the Zahar family. She gave her full name as Bison Carmen, explaining that she belonged to the Carmen family and that the others with her were companions from their vassal families. She gestured toward her gray-haired teammate and introduced her, explaining that Asha descended from a line whose ancestors had once mixed blood with a Zahar noble. Bison explained that Asha's bloodline had appeared only weakly, but it still made her highly skilled at tracking magic, even though she had no talent for concealment, and within the family they called it a primitive bloodline. Bison then said that since every misunderstanding had now been cleared up, she had a serious request for Turan, asking if he would help them hunt down the arsonist. To make the offer more tempting, she promised him the entire reward for capturing the Mad Mage, and even offered her own share of the mana they would gain, saying that all she needed for herself was the merit from completing the mission. Turan asked whether she knew the arsonist's level of power, since no one had actually seen him before, and Bison warned him that the man was almost certainly a noble-level mage. She pointed out that some of the villages he had attacked had been guarded by several knights, yet all of them had still been killed. Turan narrowed his eyes, realizing that this arsonist had not only slaughtered countless ordinary people, but had also taken down several knights. There was little doubt that the arsonist was powerful and could very well be a noble-level mage, just as Bison claimed. He reflected inwardly that the weak demonic beasts along the road no longer helped him grow stronger, and considered that perhaps the arsonist was exactly the kind of opponent he needed at that moment, so he agreed. Bison was clearly pleased to hear it, and Turan then told them that before they started the hunt, they first needed to get the child somewhere safe. The group moved to a secure place nearby where Turan handed the village elder enough money to raise the girl until she reached adulthood. The elder accepted the pouch of coins and declared that he could of course be trusted to care for her. To make sure the child would truly be protected, Turan fixed the elder with a hard stare and said he would return in a few years to check on her, so the man had better care for the child exactly as instructed. The village elder flinched under that look and quickly assured him that the child would be looked after properly. After that, the expedition truly began, and Turan and the others returned to the ruined village. Asha, whose bloodline came from ancestors mixed with a Zahar noble, shut her eyes and pushed her power further until, all at once, her eyes snapped open as she sensed something. They moved into the jungle, with Asha taking the lead, and telling the others that they still needed to search a little more. Turan asked which direction they should go, and Asha told them to follow her as she traced the clues through thick woods and rocky paths. Along the way, they saw many trees that had been destroyed, and eventually Asha came to a stop and began checking the area for another clue, while Bison and the others stayed close behind. Turan asked her exactly how she was tracking him. Asha turned and explained that she had first searched for human footprints, and once they reached the main road, she began following the smell of ash. She reasoned that if he had not changed clothes, the killer would still carry ash on him after burning down the entire village. Turan found her method highly professional, and realized that was why she had been unable to find him earlier, since she had not even known whether the culprit was a man or a woman. Then Asha suddenly declared that she had found the trail and immediately broke into a run in that direction, while Bison called after her to wait and slow down. After running for some time, they arrived near a small mountain. The group stopped before a large cave, and Asha confirmed that the arsonist was hiding inside. Bison looked at Turan and addressed him as Mr. Turan, asking him to move to the front with her while telling the rest of the group to remain behind. Bison cast a blue light spell, and together they stepped inside, the glow lighting up the cave walls. Bison then looked toward Asha and asked whether the arsonist was still inside, and whether he was alone or had others with him. Asha stared forward with blue light shining in her eyes and confirmed that only one person was there. They continued deeper until they reached a broad stone chamber, where they found a figure standing beside several torches. The man had a twisted appearance and wore a filthy red cloak over his shoulders. He looked at the group and asked what had brought them to such a remote place. Turan asked Asha whether this man was the arsonist, and she replied that she was sensing a strange smell from him, confirming that it was indeed him. Bison stepped forward to settle it. She aimed an ice arrow at the man and asked whether he was the murderer who had kidnapped and burned the nearby villagers. The man gave a grin and answered that he was not quite sure what she was talking about. Then, in an instant, his face changed as he raised one hand, and a huge blast of fire erupted, swallowing the entire stone chamber. Asha and the other knights were hurled back by the explosion and cried out in pain. Turan reacted at once, lifting his hands and activating his magic tool. He protected both himself and Bison from the flames. The arsonist showed surprise at Turan's resistance, Bison used that opening and fired an arrow that struck the arsonist in the leg, forcing him down to one knee, but he was still not finished. He slammed his hand against the ground and unleashed another spell. Two huge arms of stone rose from the ground and closed in around Turan and Bison. Turan looked at them and wondered how the arsonist could be using earth manipulation, since he had assumed the man carried a flame bloodline. Those giant arms came crashing at them, but Turan managed to avoid the strike, while Bison was too slow and took the hit directly. Turan planted his feet and began spinning his sling with a rock loaded inside. The arsonist spotted him and lifted his hand to cast another spell, but before he could trigger it, Turan released his attack. The rock flew with such speed and force that the madman had no chance to evade it, and the impact shattered his hand. The madman screamed in pain as blood burst from the wound, and his body started to collapse, while Turan rushed straight toward him. As he moved, he rubbed his fingers together and drew out a small spark of lightning. Turan then unleashed the lightning magic he had only recently learned and struck the arsonist with it. The moment the attack landed, the man screamed and fell unconscious. With him passed out, the giant stone arms began losing shape and broke apart into harmless rubble. Turan stood over the defeated enemy, still building lightning in his hand to make sure the man did not recover. Bison came through the settling dust and asked whether he had successfully brought the man down. Turan breathed a little harder from the effort and said it was most likely over. He told her that he would handle this one himself and asked her to check on the others first. Turan then took out a few seeds and scattered them onto the ground. He used his magic, and several vines burst from the seeds and coiled tightly around the arsonist. Turan thought that with the man's sight and movement sealed off, it was finished. He tapped the prisoner with his dagger and ordered him to wake up at once. The arsonist tried to move his mana, but Turan leaned in and pressed the dagger against his throat. He coldly warned him not to move even a little, and made it clear that if he tried to release any more mana, he would be killed on the spot. The blindfolded man asked who they were and how they had managed to find such a hidden place, while Turan calmly answered that they had their own methods and demanded clear confirmation that he was the arsonist behind the village massacres. The man stayed silent and stubborn until Turan drove the dagger into his leg, making him cry out in pain. Turan demanded an answer right away, asking why a rogue noble would spend his time burning helpless villagers alive. Inwardly, Turan noted that a killer this cold deserved no mercy at all. At last, the man broke and cried out that God had ordered him to do it, claiming that by burning the flesh and souls of those he judged to be sinners, he would be able to reach God himself. Bison and the others stared at him in a mix of confusion and horror, unable to understand what he was even saying. The man kept rambling like a lunatic, claiming that God had taught him the secret to gaining other bloodlines, and insisting that if he burned just a few more people, he would finally obtain the flame bloodline he wanted so badly. Bison recoiled in disgust and questioned whether this was not simply complete madness, wondering how anyone could believe they could gain an inborn bloodline that way, and thinking that carrying out massacres for such a reason was beyond absurd. Turan's expression darkened as he remembered Midan saying that even commoners could gain power by killing demonic beasts, and he had already seen many mages do exactly that. The arsonist kept muttering that he only needed to burn a few more villages before the power of flames would become his. Turan gripped his own arm and thought to himself that this might not be only the delusion of a madman, and the terrible idea crossed his mind that perhaps the man had stumbled onto one of this world's hidden secrets. After gathering all info, Tyron instantly cut off the arsonist's head without hesitation. The corpse fell to the floor in front of everyone. Several felt dread, and Bison questioned her comrades. Jill struggled for words but explained killing someone tied up felt like cold-blooded murder. Bison scolded him, reminding they would have died if things went differently. She said skinning the villain alive wouldn't make up for his victims. Tyron turned away to search the room. He found a book on the ground and picked it up. Examining the pages, Tyran saw a map matching burned villages. Realizing he had proof of guilt, he noticed unusual combination formulas, wondering if God taught them. Lost in thought, Bison called him. She suggested starting mana absorption and leaving to tell nearby people the arsonist was dead. The group then began absorbing mana using their techniques. The scene shifted to the official gave Lady Bison a reward for capturing the madman, praising her as a rising star of House Carmen. She took the box but thanked him, saying he flattered her too much. Turning to Tyran, she asked about his plans since they had already shared their rewards. Tyran quickly said he was going to Abucho. Bison whispered to Tyran not to repeat what the madman claimed yesterday. Tyron promised silence, thinking such talk would cause big trouble. Bison nodded and left with her team. Tyran watched them go, deciding there was no need to share his doubts without proof. He continued alone through a desolate desert area where he saw no one else. After some time, Tyran noticed the air getting more humid as he walked. He snapped his fingers to test magic, seeing his fire power weaken while water powers grew stronger. A small flame appeared in his hand, and he noted difficulty with fire spells but ease with creating a large water sphere. Realizing this meant something, Tyran spotted a shimmering water reflection and headed that way. He arrived at a port town with ships docked. This confirmed he was in Abucho. Inside the city, sailors were talking. One asked if they would sail tomorrow. The captain, with an eye patch, said yes, but complained about merman attacks ruining their hulls. Another man asked if things are really that bad. An old sailor mentions they also have to deal with ruthless pirates. The captain, with a patch over one eye, groans, saying they'll be spending money on funerals instead of wages if this continues. He adds they desperately need a skilled knight for protection. At that moment, Tyron approaches the table and stops in front of them, asking if they're heading to the Enral Desert. The captain looks up and bluntly says they leave tomorrow, but warns there's no room for passengers unless they leave behind a barrel of booze. Hearing this, Tyron stays calm and places his hand on a cup on the table. Seeing this, the captain asks what he's doing, but Tyron is silenced when the cup suddenly turns to ice. The captain looks visibly shaken by this magic display. The other man at the table stands up respectfully and asks why such an important guest is in such a humble place, but Tyran says they're there just for work. The one-eyed captain's attitude changes instantly as he asks what Tyran needs for the night. Tyran explains he wants to reach the Enral Desert as a hireling rather than a passenger. He offers to fight any mermen or pirates that attack them, suggesting his service can pay for his passage. The captain realizes Tyran overheard their problems but sighs and says the ship is poor and can't offer good conditions. Tyran tells him pay and conditions don't matter since he just wants to reach General. Hearing this, the captain is surprised by Tyran's determination but quickly agrees, telling him he can join the crew immediately. The scene changes to a different location where chaos reigns. Multiple houses are burning during an unexpected attack by dark elves. Soldiers struggle to defend against the invaders. A dark elf notices a lone soldier and charges at him, but the soldier cuts it down. However, the fight isn't over as another dark elf rushes toward him, and he manages. He decides to kill another one too. As he fights desperately, many enemies fall before him, yet more keep appearing without stopping. Noticing this, the soldier understands he can't handle the endless attack. Just as a monster prepares to attack, golden lightning strikes from above, destroying all nearby monsters. The soldier looks up in amazement and sees Mesa flying gracefully overhead. He feels relieved and thanks her, but Mesa stays calm and tells him to return to his unit. The soldier obeys quickly and rushes back into the battle. A man flies close to Mesa and calls out. It's Kadrim Arabian, the vice commander of the Arabian subjugation force, asking if she's hurt. Mesa says she's fine, though Kadrim warns her not to overexert herself since her life is more valuable than a few nights. Ignoring his warning, she asks for an update on the situation. Kadrim replies that things are under control and they'll retake the region soon. He mentions they haven't found enemy tunnels yet, but tells Mesa to notify him if they do, because he plans to enter them himself. After this, Mesa flies away. Seeing her dismissive attitude, Kadrim clicks his tongue in annoyance, muttering about how spoiled she is and calling her an annoying girl. He worries that if she keeps acting like this, she might end up suffering the same fate as her mother and brother. Back on Tyran's ship, he stands by the window staring at the vast ocean. Reflecting on his journey, he wonders how he will find any clues even if he reaches Zahar lands. He thinks charging into the Zahar family without knowing his father's name or position could be dangerous. With just a portrait of his mother and some of her belongings, Tyran ponders how long it will take to uncover the truth before the one-eyed captain taps him on the shoulder. The captain jokes that Tyran might dry up the sea if he keeps staring at it and asks what's on tonight's agenda. Tyran says he was thinking about how big the ocean is. The captain agrees, mentioning sailors get seasick after too much time at sea. He asks Tyran if he's coping well with the sickness, to which Tyran replies he's fine. The captain notes that Tyran has been learning from the bosun, tying knots and handling sails. He adds the bosun was excited to teach him. Tyran smiles, admitting it seemed good to learn but found it more fun than expected. A crew member calls out that mealtime is starting. The captain claps his hands and tells everyone to go to the mess hall. During dinner, an old man tells Tyran land food tastes better. He explains they have sour rations to prevent gum disease, which can cause gums to bleed until a person dies. Sour food helps, he says, as fruit spoils quickly. The old man mentions this knowledge spread over time and that some people used to eat raw mermaids before knowing about the sour rations. Suddenly, someone shouts they see a ship ahead at 2 o'clock. Someone asks if it's pirates. The lookout can't be sure, but notes no family crest is flying from the mast. The old man mutters the weather was too good and assumes the ship is definitely pirate. The captain yells for everyone to get ready for battle, and they rush to grab weapons. The old man approaches the captain asking for escape plans, suggesting running. But the captain says the enemy is faster and will catch them eventually. The captain considers their situation and asks Turan if he can handle the threat. Turan says, as long as there are no nobles or knights among the enemies, it won't be a problem. Hearing this, the captain orders. The ship turned, heading towards the enemy, causing the crew to cheer for Turan as they shouted for the pirates' deaths. The two ships drew near. On the enemy vessel, armed pirates were ready, shouting orders and threatening sailors who tried to stop them, promising mercy if they surrendered. Turan wondered about their promises, but noted that an old man's question, whether being thrown overboard after having legs cut off counted as mercy, reflected his suspicions. He leaped from his ship alone and boarded the pirate vessel. The pirates were surprised by his boldness and demanded to know who he was. Using magic, Turan lifted water directly from the sea, turning it into ice shards that pierced the enemies. The pirates screamed in pain. Turan glared at the survivors, saying there was no reason to spare them, as he began releasing mana. Many pirates had already been killed when the remaining ones turned angry and fearful faces toward him. One man stepped forward, shouting at his crew to not be afraid, and declaring that if they didn't kill the youth, they would die instead. This removed hesitation among the pirates. Driven by desperation, all charged forward together, weapons raised, rushing towards Turan for a coordinated attack. Standing calmly, Turan watched everything unfold with a cold expression. Suddenly, water from the sea shot toward him. Before the pirates could reach him, it transformed into an ice blade in his hand. Without delay, he swung and cut down several pirates. Seeing this, someone behind called out to continue attacking and finish Turan there, encouraging more pirates to rush forward. Turan immediately blocked. With surgical precision, he sent their swords flying and killed 2 pirates instantly in one swift motion. Another pirate tried a sneak attack, but Turan cut him down too. Despite many pirates surrounding him, Turan noticed it wasn't easy handling them all at once. He launched a powerful attack that wiped out several pirates with a single blow. Their bodies fell, and ice crystals appeared from their wounds, spreading quickly across the deck. Suddenly, in chaos, one pirate snuck up behind Turan and grabbed him tightly. The man tried to restrain him, raising a knife to stab Turan's neck. He shouted at others that he had Turan and told them to kill him fast. 2 more pirates rushed forward with their weapons ready. Held from behind, Turan slowly turned his intense, cold gaze toward the man restraining him. It was clear the pirates' attacks couldn't affect him. Even with full strength, no blade could pierce his skin. In a flash, Turan moved, killing both the man holding him and the 2 charging pirates. Everything happened so quickly they couldn't react. His movements were sharp, precise, and impossible to follow. As he continued fighting, Turan cut down more pirates without pausing. Blood splashed on him, staining his body from head to toe, but it only made him look colder and more intimidating. His presence seemed almost untouchable. Soon, every pirate was dead, none left standing. From Turan's body radiated an overwhelming killing intent, heavy enough to make anyone nearby feel uneasy. Sailors from another ship began throwing ropes across so they could approach. Shortly after, the captain with his crew arrived to see the scene. Turan spoke half-jokingly yet impressed. He wondered aloud if he worked as a cleaner on the side, adding that if he cleaned up this perfectly, the crew wouldn't have anything left to do. He said the display was amazing and shouted, "Long live the knight!" Hearing this, the rest of the crew started shouting the same words repeatedly, their voices filled with admiration and excitement. Then one crew member stepped forward and respectfully addressed Turan, suggesting he see the physician first. Turan calmly replied there was no need to worry because he wasn't hurt anywhere, explaining that all the blood on him belonged to the pirates. A few moments later, the captain came up with a report. He said they searched every part of the enemy ships and found out it was a merchant vessel that had gone missing a few years ago. The captain noted that the pirates captured it, repainted it, and used it themselves, adding that such actions were typical for lowlifes. The captain then asked Turan what he planned to do since he finished the fight alone. He said ownership of the ship belonged entirely to Turan before congratulating him on becoming a new ship owner. Even after this, Turan showed no real excitement and didn't look particularly thrilled about suddenly owning a ship. Instead, he simply looked at the captain and asked what was usually done in such cases. The captain then laid out several options for handling the situation. He suggested Turan could take it back to Ibiza and tell the original owner he found it while asking for a reward, though he warned that paperwork and bureaucrats would take a month or two. Another option was to go to the annual desert and sell it, but he suggested selling it at the northern sea islands along their way might be better. He explained that neighborhoods always needed ships desperately, and the rule was to sell to whoever needed it most for the highest price. However, moving such a large ship would require mobilizing quite a bit of resources. Turan thinks he can't sail that ship alone anyway. He tells the captain if he uses people, he should pay for it. The captain laughs happily, saying Turan understands. He suggests Turan could give 10% of the profit as a service fee for his crew. Turan stays calm and offers instead to handle everything up to the sale for 20%. The captain smiles wider and agrees, promising to use his connections for good prices. Just then, a crew member rushes in, shouting about a mermaid. The captain is surprised and asks if pirates are attacking now. The man says no. They have a mermaid captive under the deck. Both Turan and the captain are shocked and head outside to check. Meanwhile, the crew cleans up after battle. An old sailor leads the captain down to the lower deck. As they walk, the captain wonders about an important guest but hasn't checked yet. He asks Turan if he wants to see it. Turan agrees. They continue toward the hold, where Turan asks if mermaids sell for much. The captain says yes, especially a pretty female one, as rich men on land love mysterious things. They enter and find a young bound merman instead of what they expected. The captain sighs and speaks with disappointment, saying it's a pity the captive is male. He mentions that this one will fetch little money because rich lords have no interest in male mermaids. He adds that unless the captive is a legendary royal who can turn into a fish, he's worthless. Hearing this, the merman snaps back angrily and proudly, asking how they dare call him male. He declares himself Armani, the 47th prince of North Estadale, demanding respect from the lowly humans. Turan asks if the boy is really claiming to be royalty, and the captain observes the boy, suggesting he might just be bluffing because that's the only way they'll keep him alive and sell him. The captain asks Armani if he can transform into a fish, and Armani immediately says no. When asked why, Armani shouts back that he is restrained and out of water now, explaining he must enter the sea in perfect condition to transform. The captain turns to Turan and whispers that the boy is trying tricks to escape, asking what Turan wants to do. Turan steps forward and asks if mermaids often eat humans, and the captain confirms they do. Hearing this, Turan speaks without hesitation, saying he will kill Armani because he's not worth any money anyway, reasoning it's better that way. He notes it would be a jackpot if what he said was true, but warns they'll look foolish if they release him only for him to run away. A dark and heavy killing intent radiates from Turan as the air grows thicker. His hand glows and slowly moves toward Armani. Seeing this, Armani panics and shouts for Turan to stop, asking how he dares do this. As Turan's hand keeps moving closer, his voice falters. He quickly adds that he has never eaten a human in his life and never intended to. Looking into Turan's cold eyes, he sees no hesitation. Real fear takes over him, and in desperation, he shouts that if Turan spares him, Turan hesitated at treasure, making Armani nod quickly and proceed. He said they would get things left by the gods humans worship. Then, everyone disembarked at a port where sailors were chatting about having drinks. The captain approached Turan, asking if he had decided. Turan replied that the location wasn't far, promising to return tonight after heading there. The scene changed to night under a full moon. Turan set off in a small boat with Armani chained behind him. Armani seemed annoyed and asked why they were chained, questioning if Turan thought he would run away. He reminded Turan that as a prince, he kept his promises. Turan didn't respond, the silence making Armani uneasy. He asked again if Turan would really let him go once they found the treasure. Turan simply said yes. The two had crossed the ocean aboard a small boat while heading toward the treasure's location. Armani casually explained that anything tied to Freya only appeared valuable to people from the mainland, once again lowering expectations. As they approached the destination, Armani pointed toward a small island rising from the water in the distance. Turan silently continued rowing, but at the same time he lowered one hand into the sea and activated a search spell through the water itself. Instantly, countless living creatures filled his senses. Schools of fish moved through the currents while massive beings hid far below in the darkness of the deep ocean. After carefully checking the surroundings, Turan confirmed that Armani had not lured him into some deadly merfolk nest. Once they arrived, both stepped onto the island and searched farther inland. Armani nervously tried recalling the exact location until he suddenly discovered a hidden lake. Confidently, he claimed the treasure rested at the bottom of it. The moment he casually mentioned that the lake was nearly 300 meters deep, Turan looked at him with clear disbelief. Not long after, Armani ended up tied once again with thick ropes. Filled with anger, Armani accused Turan of distrusting him, but Turan ignored every complaint and coldly remarked that Armani should simply hope he survived the dive. After removing his clothes, Turan entered the lake and descended deeper into the darkness below. As he continued sinking, ancient underwater ruins gradually appeared around him. Massive stone structures covered the bottom, creating the image of a civilization buried and forgotten beneath the water for countless years. Then he saw it. Coiled around a gigantic rock formation rested an enormous serpent-like figure, and standing above it was what appeared to be a human statue. The sight was so overwhelming that Turan nearly forgot he was underwater. As he moved closer, he noticed something shocking. The figure was not carved from stone at all. It was an actual human body preserved perfectly beneath the water. No decay existed on it, nor had it transformed into some undead creature. The body looked completely frozen in time. Near the waist of the preserved figure, Turan noticed a glowing object shaped like a golden compass. At that moment, he immediately realized this was the treasure Armani had mentioned. After retrieving it, Turan returned to the surface and headed back toward the shore. The moment he arrived, Armani excitedly asked whether the treasure had been found, and Turan calmly confirmed it. At the same time, the water surrounding Armani's body began reacting in a strange way, allowing Turan to sense his life force and internal energy far more clearly than before. Keeping his promise, Turan used telekinesis to rip apart the ropes and chains restraining Armani. The young prince stood frozen in shock, unable to believe he had actually been freed instead of being sold off once again. Turan simply explained that Armani had guided him honestly, so he intended to keep his word. Overcome with joy, Armani repeatedly thanked him, and even promised that if a war ever erupted between humans and sea beings, he would spare Turan's life. Turan casually ignored the statement while putting his clothes back on. Soon after, Armani walked toward the sea, and his body slowly began to change. For the first time, Turan witnessed the prince's true appearance as an actual sea being. Watching the transformation carefully, he finally understood that Armani had truly belonged to royalty from the very beginning. The following morning aboard the ship, the atmosphere had completely changed. Several sailors were being harshly punished after returning late from the harbor and causing problems inside a tavern. Their backs were covered with deep lash marks, while the old sailor overseeing the punishment shouted endlessly about discipline. When Turan asked about the situation, another crew member explained that the sailors had ignored the captain's direct orders. As Turan watched the wounded men, he noticed something strange. Most of the sailors carried blue internal energy, but one injured man emitted a visible red glow instead. From this, Turan realized he could now visually sense life force and vitality through a person's wounds and condition. Later, he learned that the captain had gone ashore to negotiate the sale of the captured pirate ship. Turan soon joined him and met the buyer, Captain Samuel. Samuel agreed to purchase the vessel for 1,000 Zahar gold coins. However, Turan requested a different form of payment. Carrying such a massive amount of gold would only become troublesome, so he asked whether the value could instead be exchanged for magic tools or holy relics. Samuel explained that such items were difficult to acquire there and suggested visiting Komod, the second city within Zahar territory, a place ruled by a bloodline known for beast taming. The mention of tamers immediately caught Turan's attention. A beast capable of understanding human speech could become extremely useful during his travels. The thought reminded him of someone from his past who once possessed a remarkably intelligent horse. Back aboard the ship, the crew had become far more relaxed after surviving the pirate attack. Some sailors even joked that the pirates had unknowingly turned themselves into walking moneybags by attacking someone descended from God's people. But the calm atmosphere vanished the moment dark storm clouds appeared ahead. The sailors instantly rushed into action, while the old man barked orders to secure the sails and protect the cargo before the storm reached them. Soon, violent waves slammed against the ship with brutal force, throwing sailors and treasure chests across the deck. Just before several crew members were swept into the sea, their bodies suddenly stopped in midair. Using telekinesis without revealing himself, Turan silently pulled them back onto the ship, while also moving all the cargo safely below deck with little effort. Once everything had been secured, the storm only grew worse. Massive waves crashed around the vessel like towering walls of water, forcing the entire crew to gather beneath the deck for shelter. Freezing seawater and violent winds left everyone shaking uncontrollably from the cold. Turan entered the crowded room and immediately checked whether anyone had been injured. The crew sincerely thanked Turan for saving their lives, while the captain openly admitted that the ship would have likely sunk without his help. Noticing how severely the freezing weather affected everyone, Turan ordered the sailors to gather around him. At first, the captain panicked, believing Turan intended to start a fire aboard the wooden ship itself. Instead, Turan calmly snapped his fingers and formed a perfectly controlled sphere of magical flame. The fire released steady warmth throughout the room without burning or damaging anything around it. The freezing sailors quickly crowded around the floating flame in shock and relief, finally escaping the brutal cold waiting outside. As the captain stared at the magic illuminating the dark interior of the ship, an old teaching suddenly returned to his mind. Humans existed to serve wizards, while wizards, in return, were meant to guide and protect humanity. The scene shifted toward Komad, the largest city within the northern Enril Desert. Countless mercenary ships filled the busy harbor as they arrived one after another, turning the port into a sea of noise and constant movement. Before parting ways, one of the men handed Turan a pouch filled with money as payment for his help. Turan immediately hesitated, believing the amount was far too large considering they had only been helping each other from the beginning. The man then explained that every member of the crew had willingly contributed a small portion of the profits earned from selling the pirate ship. Refusing the payment would only leave them feeling guilty, as though they were rejecting the will of God himself. After hearing that explanation, Turan finally accepted the pouch and placed it inside his bag. Calmly, he remarked that if fate allowed them to meet again someday, he would personally repay them with a proper meal. The man felt deeply honored after hearing those words. Not long after, Turan stepped off the ship and prepared to head toward Komad City. The mercenaries gathered together to bid him farewell, telling the knight to stay safe while assuring him that none of them would ever forget him. They sincerely thanked him once more and admitted they would genuinely miss his presence aboard the ship. Hearing those honest words, Turan responded with nothing more than a quiet smile. As he continued deeper into the city, he gradually began sensing traces of mana flowing within certain individuals nearby. While observing the crowded streets, Turan suddenly stopped a knight and asked whether he belonged to House Durman. The moment the knight felt the overwhelming pressure radiating from Turan, his entire expression immediately changed. Without hesitation, the man lowered his head and bowed respectfully, nervously confirming his identity while declaring himself ready to obey any command given to him. Turan then introduced himself as Turan of Abacha and revealed his intention to meet the head of the house. Not long afterward, Turan arrived at the residence of House Durman. There, Cal Durman handed him a fresh set of clothes and waited quietly while he changed. After seeing Turan wearing the outfit, Cal commented that the clothes fit him unexpectedly well. At the same time, Turan silently noticed the enormous amount of mana flowing inside Cal Durman himself. Cal then formally introduced himself with a calm and respectful greeting. For a brief moment, both men simply stared at one another in confusion, as though something about the encounter felt strangely familiar to both of them. Breaking the silence, Cal asked for Turan's name and bloodline. Turan introduced himself as Turan Brahms and explained that he came from a fallen guardian family. He also revealed that rumors had led him there with the intention of purchasing a monster. After hearing the explanation, Cal calmly accepted the request and decided to have his daughter personally guide him through the estate. Before the conversation ended, Turan hesitantly asked whether Cal had ever seen someone who looked similar to him. Cal appeared slightly surprised by the sudden question. Turan then pointed out that Cal had clearly shown hesitation the moment he first saw him earlier. Attempting to brush the matter aside, Cal claimed it was nothing important. Still, after a moment, he eventually admitted that Turan simply resembled someone he once knew. As Cal Durman's daughter guided Turan through the estate, she casually remarked that although he claimed to belong to a fallen noble family, he still appeared to possess considerable wealth. The fact that he had come to House Durman specifically to purchase a monster only increased her curiosity further. She assumed that perhaps guardian bloodlines were naturally suited for the life of mercenaries. Turan gave no reaction to her words. Instead, his thoughts remained fixed on something entirely different. He continued wondering whose face Cal Durman had recognized in him. The first person that came to mind was his mother. He remembered her curly hair, slightly large ears, and straight mouth. Turan admitted to himself that he did resemble her in several ways. However, he could not understand whether those similarities alone were enough for Cal to recognize someone immediately after seeing him. That thought slowly led him toward another possibility. Turan began wondering if the person Cal had recognized was actually his father, a man whose face he had never once seen in his life. Before he could continue thinking further, they finally reached their destination. Cal Durman's daughter welcomed him to the breeding grounds of House Durman. The place was enormous. Countless large rooms stretched across the massive grounds, each one housing a completely different creature. The sight immediately caught Turan's attention, leaving him genuinely impressed by the scale of everything around him. As he continued exploring, he noticed that every room had been carefully designed to perfectly match the natural habitat of the creature living inside it. The amount of detail and care put into the place left a strong impression on him. While examining the monsters one after another, Turan eventually pointed toward a horse and asked about its price. Cal Durman's daughter explained that the creature had been raised with extraordinary care, which was why it cost 4,000 gold coins. The moment Turan heard the amount, he completely froze in shock. In an instant, he realized the price was nearly double his entire fortune. At that moment, the truth hit him hard. Turan finally understood that he had been completely wrong to think he was wealthy. The reality of his situation became painfully clear. He even began considering whether he should give up on purchasing a monster entirely. At the same time, another concern weighed heavily on his mind. Crossing the desert while carrying a massive chest filled with money was obviously dangerous. As Turan continued walking through the breeding grounds, he suddenly stopped after noticing an eagle resting inside one of the cages. Curious, he asked about its price. Cal Durman's daughter explained that the eagle cost 1,500 gold coins. After hearing the amount, Turan immediately realized it was far cheaper than the other creatures he had seen so far. Even if buying it would consume nearly all of his savings, he still considered the price worthwhile because of the eagle's impressive mana capacity. Wanting to know more, Turan asked about the creature's abilities. She explained that the eagle possessed exceptional intelligence, along with remarkable flying skills. Still, the explanation failed to impress him very much. Noticing his reaction, she continued by explaining that the eagle was actually one of their more popular species. Unfortunately, its intelligence had become a serious problem. The creature refused to obey anyone it considered less intelligent than itself. Turan then stared directly at the eagle and wondered whether it could truly understand him. The eagle calmly answered with several small gestures, making it obvious that it understood every single word. Even after realizing this, Turan casually remarked that the creature was still somewhat ugly. The moment the eagle heard those words, irritation immediately appeared across its expression. That reaction alone completely convinced Turan that the creature understood absolutely everything being said around it. Cal Durman's daughter then revealed that she had once attempted to teach the eagle how to read. However, the creature stubbornly refused to learn. She could not determine whether it truly lacked the ability or simply had no interest in trying. To her, the situation felt like a complete waste. The eagle possessed enormous strength for its size and had been fed monster meat for many years. If only it listened properly, its value would have become far greater. As the conversation continued, the eagle suddenly began making gestures from inside the cage, as though it wanted something. Cal Durman's daughter attempted to communicate with it, but quickly assumed there was no point asking further. At that exact moment, the eagle slowly stretched one claw toward Turan. The unexpected action completely shocked her. She could not understand why the creature had suddenly taken interest in him. The eagle responded with another firm nod, making its intentions perfectly clear. Turan, confused by the eagle's sudden attachment toward him, admitted that he was not anyone particularly special and questioned why the creature had chosen him in the first place. Even so, he made the eagle an offer. If he decided to purchase it, then the creature would have to agree to learn how to read. After hearing those conditions, the eagle quietly nodded in agreement. Using his mana, Cal Durman completed the contract and officially formed the bond between Turan and the eagle. Once the process ended, Cal admitted that he found it surprising how obediently the creature followed Turan's commands. He then advised him to take proper care of it. Turan calmly promised that he would. Even so, Cal hesitated briefly before suddenly asking whether Turan had any connection to someone named Talos. Confused by the question, Turan asked who Talos was supposed to be. Cal immediately brushed the subject aside and told him to forget the question entirely. Still, the name remained firmly stuck in Turan's mind. He realized that Talos was most likely the person Cal had remembered the moment he first saw his face. Wanting answers of his own, Turan decided to ask a question in return. He pulled out a picture of his mother and asked whether Cal knew a woman named Vijay. Cal denied ever knowing anyone by that name. Not long afterward, Turan grabbed the eagle by its legs and explained that since he had already paid for the creature and completed the contract, it was only natural to confirm whether everything functioned properly. The eagle then lifted Turan into the sky and carried him through the air for a short flight. After some time passed, he safely returned to the ground. Cal Durman's daughter immediately asked how the flight had gone, and Turan simply replied that it had been good. Soon afterward, she began introducing Turan to the other people gathered there. One of the men looked surprised after learning that Turan lived in Carmane, mentioning that the place was close to Arabian. Before the conversation could continue any further, Cal Durman's daughter firmly warned him not to compare their guest to those sparrows. The man then reached out, shook hands with Turan, and introduced himself as Dolph Marin from a history bloodline. During the handshake, Turan instantly felt Dolph tightening his grip in an attempt to display his physical strength. After realizing how solid and sturdy Turan's body felt, Dolph smirked and remarked that such toughness was expected from someone belonging to a guardian bloodline. Meanwhile, a nearby woman showed no interest in their display of strength and quickly shifted the conversation elsewhere. Instead, she asked about the difficult eagle because she had specifically come there hoping to see it. Turan explained that he had allowed the eagle to fly around nearby for a while. After spending the entire morning practicing writing, the creature had probably started feeling trapped and restless. He then casually offered to call the eagle over if she wanted to see it. The moment Turan called for the creature, the eagle immediately returned without hesitation. The woman looked genuinely shocked that it had actually listened and come back. However, the moment the woman tried to pet the eagle, the creature immediately reacted with hostility. That response instantly angered her. Furious, she demanded to know what exactly she lacked for the eagle to treat her that way. She insisted that she could raise the creature far better than some fallen noble, yet despite that, the eagle had still chosen Turan instead. Both Turan and the eagle stared at her with obvious confusion. As the atmosphere slowly calmed, everyone eventually gathered together for a meal. During dinner, the woman mentioned that recent events had become increasingly troublesome because of the dark elf tribes living in the western regions. Before long, the conversation shifted toward the Arabian subjugation force. Someone brought up the commander, the skinny Mesa, and openly expressed hope that she would finally get assassinated this time. The group burst into cruel laughter while mocking her appearance, insulting her thin body, and claiming they pitied whoever might end up becoming her husband someday. Even while joking, they admitted that Arabian at least had an easier situation because successors had already been secured there. In comparison, uncertainty still surrounded the future leadership between Rahman, Alma, and Perga. Eventually, someone complained that Talos still had not made a proper decision. Hearing that name once again, Turan finally asked what kind of person Talos actually was. Cal Durman's daughter explained that Talos was the younger brother of the househead and currently served as the second in command of Zahar. In reality, he was essentially the true leader managing the entire house. After hearing that explanation, Turan quietly started realizing that his father might have been far more important than he had ever imagined before. Next, the scene focused on Turan as he sat in silence beside his newly acquired bird, his thoughts drifting endlessly. His mind repeatedly returned to Lord Cal, the man who had reacted the instant their eyes met. Turan had already learned that Lord Cal held the position of second-in-command within the Zahar family. The possibility that this man could be his true father weighed heavily on him. Fear settled in his chest as he imagined the consequences. If he truly existed as nothing more than a disgrace to that noble family, then the moment they uncovered the truth, they could erase him as easily as stepping on an insect. Those dark concerns continued to occupy his mind. At that moment, the young eagle suddenly lowered its head and began carving words into the dirt with its beak. With visible pride, the bird wrote that it was a black eagle. Turan acknowledged the effort and praised it for getting the phrase right. Moments later, however, the eagle wrote down the exact words Turan had spoken earlier. Turan quickly noted that he had never instructed the bird to copy that part. Even worse, the sentence still contained mistakes despite the attempt. The topic naturally shifted to the unusual creature itself. Turan wondered whether the eagle had finally chosen a name. In response, the bird wrote that it still had no name. At first, Turan misunderstood and briefly assumed that No Name Yet was the name it had selected. Not long afterward, he questioned why the eagle had chosen him from the beginning. The bird carefully wrote that it liked Turan. It also explained that something buried deep within him felt similar to its own nature, creating a strange sense of connection between them. Once again, Turan corrected the eagle's wording, explaining that what it actually meant was that it liked him. Even then, he pointed out that the sentence remained filled with errors. It became obvious that the eagle still had much to learn and would require far more practice before mastering writing. While the bird continued its lessons, Turan's thoughts wandered once more. The eagle had claimed that something inside him felt similar to itself. That remark made him consider whether the feeling came from his mixed heritage, blood inherited from both the Zahar family and another family whose identity remained unknown. Before he could continue exploring the idea, Dolph suddenly appeared and approached him. Dolph mentioned that he planned to spend some time hunting and training later in order to loosen up. He casually invited Turan to join him. Turan calmly revealed that he would be departing that very day. The news caught Dolph off guard. He complained that Turan should have informed him sooner and behaved as if they had already become close friends. Despite Dolph's relaxed and friendly manner, Turan remained doubtful. In his eyes, Dolph was the type of person who enjoyed using his strength to dominate others. It seemed to Turan that the man simply liked feeding his own sense of superiority through pointless actions. Maintaining his usual cheerful attitude, Dolph offered to personally guide Turan if assistance was needed. He confidently stated that he knew the entire area better than anyone. Turan immediately declined and made it clear that such help would not be necessary. Although Dolph acted disappointed, he casually remarked that Turan could always seek him out if he changed his mind. After Dolph finally departed, Turan's unease only grew stronger. The fact that Dolph had abandoned the matter so easily made him even more suspicious. Not long after, Turan began walking through the area, while a servant followed several steps behind him. He informed the servant that there was no reason to accompany him any farther. The servant explained that the order had come directly from Lord Cal himself. Their responsibility was to ensure Turan's safety and escort him all the way to the outer walls. As they continued forward, Turan requested a guide familiar with the desert and several religious books connected to Enril. He also paid for the books in advance before receiving them. The servant accepted the request without objection. Later, Turan picked one of the books and carefully read through its contents. While examining it, he noticed that the author was Britzo Zahar. It did not take long for him to realize that the publication had been supported by the Zahar main family. Although he found the map included in the book poorly drawn and lacking detail, the written information still seemed valuable. While traveling, Turan paid attention to the people around him. He soon noticed that nearly everyone he encountered possessed mana within their bodies. The journey continued as he moved farther into the desert. Hours passed, and eventually darkness spread across the land as night arrived. By that point, Turan had already discovered that Dolph had been trailing him from the beginning. Without bothering to look back, Turan calmly told him there was no reason to remain hidden any longer. Dolph stepped out while laughing, openly admitting that Turan had noticed his presence. Turan explained that there was a reason he had deliberately traveled that far on foot, instead of using a mount. Dolph casually claimed that he had only followed because someone as young as Turan was crossing a dangerous desert alone. He acted as though his actions came from simple concern for the dangers of the region. Turan, however, looked at him with a cold expression and immediately exposed what he believed was the truth. He accused Dolph of targeting his mana. Rather than denying the accusation, Dolph's smile only widened. He found it entertaining that Turan had knowingly traveled there alone, despite fully understanding the risks involved. From his perspective, it was difficult to tell whether Turan's actions came from courage or stupidity. Turan then remarked that he finally understood why nobles disliked hearing conversations about fallen noble houses. Dolph reacted with a faint grin and pointed out the irony behind those words. In his eyes, Turan's situation looked even worse than his own. He carefully studied Turan and concluded that while his mana reserves were exceptionally large, his physical body was unusually fragile. Dolph assumed that Turan belonged to a primitive branch of the Guardian bloodline, a family line that had preserved its resistance traits while gradually losing its physical power over generations. At the same time, he could not understand how someone with such a weak body had managed to accumulate such an enormous amount of mana. Even so, Dolph considered it a waste. In his view, someone lacking strength had no right to possess that much power. Because of that, He demanded that Turan surrender all of it willingly. Turan calmly acknowledged the gap between his body and his mana. His body was weak, yet his mana seemed endless. He mockingly described himself as the ideal target. Immediately afterward, he quietly ordered his pet bird to leave the area. Once the bird departed, Turan turned his attention back to Dolph and remarked that Dolph appeared far too confident about the situation. At first, Dolph assumed that Turan was depending on concealment magic. To him, that type of magic was little more than a cheap trick that hid appearance while doing nothing to conceal a person's presence. He viewed it as a useless method often used by weak knights who liked pretending to be spies. Dolph laughed loudly and ridiculed the idea that such magic could be effective. Certain of himself, he believed that breaking concealment magic was simple and saw no reason for Turan to think escape was possible. Then, in the very next moment, his confidence vanished. Turan had disappeared completely. Dolph could no longer detect his presence in any way. The only evidence left behind was a trail of faint footprints pressed into the sand. His expression immediately changed. Suspicion filled his mind as he wondered whether this was some unique technique tied to the Zahar family. Before he could think further, Turan suddenly emerged behind him and launched several quick strikes in succession. The attack caught Dolph completely off guard. Reacting at once, he released flames around his body, lighting up the surrounding desert. Clenching his teeth in frustration, he believed that removing the darkness would expose Turan's hiding place. His eyes searched every direction. He was determined to find Turan even once. Using the flames as both light and weapon, Dolph launched a direct assault across the area. It accomplished nothing. Turan vanished once more. Moving swiftly through the darkness, he attacked from every side. Blows came one after another before Dolph could properly respond. As the attacks continued, injuries gradually spread across his body. Frustration quickly turned into desperation. Unable to locate his opponent, Dolph demanded that Turan reveal himself. Soon he realized the situation was slipping beyond his control. Without warning, Dolph turned around and began fleeing across the desert. As he ran, panic filled his thoughts. He had finally understood the truth. Turan was not a member of the Guardian bloodline. Fighting a mage of that bloodline in the desert at night was nearly the same as throwing away one's life. Even if Turan truly carried Zahar blood, Dolph convinced himself that his physical abilities were still superior. As long as he kept moving, he believed Turan would never be able to catch him. That hope did not last long. Before he had gone very far, Turan suddenly appeared above him, flying through the night beside his pet bird. Looking down from above, Turan observed that Dolph was far more durable than expected. Although he was nowhere near the level of a true guardian, he had endured much longer than an ordinary noble should have. Turan even considered the possibility that Dolph possessed some form of defensive magic item. At that moment, the last of Dolph's confidence disappeared. His legs gave out beneath him, and he dropped to his knees. Desperate to survive, he pleaded for mercy. Turan slowly raised a hand while looking down at him with a cold expression. His actions made it clear that mercy was not an option. The next instant, a massive amount of fire mana surged from his hand. The flames swallowed Dolph completely. Trapped within the blaze, he burned in the middle of the desert night as the fire consumed him. When everything finally ended, his entire body had been reduced by the flames. Seeing the result, Turan concluded that Dolph had been considerably tougher than he had first expected. Turan understood that Dolph's durability most likely came from his connection to an ancient bloodline. After thinking it through, he concluded that if Dolph had been a properly trained guardian of the Zahar family, the stone-based attack he had just used would probably not have been powerful enough to penetrate his defenses. That realization pushed Turan toward a new goal. He began considering ways to create a stronger offensive technique. What he wanted was a piercing spell capable of breaking through any defense placed in front of it. With the matter of Dolph settled, Turan turned his attention toward the feast that awaited him. While preparing, he came across a strange object with a mechanical appearance. After examining it, he quickly realized that the item could store magical energy. The object indicated that it still held 38% of its total capacity. Turan wondered how it was meant to be used, and briefly thought about consuming its contents directly. The idea disappeared almost immediately. Remembering that the item was a divine object linked to Freya, he decided against doing anything careless. Before attempting anything, he would first need to understand its purpose and function. Not long afterward, Turan left the area and continued his journey through the sky alongside his pet bird. As time passed, he finally reached the Tomb of the Gods. There, he encountered a young woman and explained everything that had happened during his travels. After listening to his story, the girl came to a simple conclusion. Turan had left home and crossed dangerous lands entirely on his own. To her, the decision sounded incredibly reckless. She also realized that he had somehow managed to avoid thieves, bandits, and dangerous magical beasts throughout the trip. Turan viewed it differently and attributed his survival to simple luck. Before long, the discussion shifted toward the Tomb of the Gods itself. Turan mentioned that he had read in a book that anyone could enter the tomb if they possessed enough money. The girl seemed surprised that he spent time reading books at all and assumed he must have come from a wealthy household. However, she informed him that entering the tomb was currently impossible. Roughly a week earlier, several influential figures had arrived at the site. Since then, access to the entire area had been restricted. Even merchant caravans had been turned away and prevented from entering. Those individuals belonged to the Zahar family. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Perga and the group that remained trapped inside the area. The people around him continued directing blame at him for their current situation. Despite the constant criticism, Perga defended his actions. He explained that his intention had only been to secure the location for the family head. At the same time, he tried to stop everyone from shouting and creating even more disorder. Perga had already discovered that a hidden underground section existed beneath the Tomb of the Gods. Because of that discovery, he believed that whoever uncovered the secrets hidden there could gain enough influence to become the next leader of the family. At that moment, Perga recalled the underground location his grandfather had spoken about long ago. For years, he had believed it was nothing more than a dead-end maze. Every year, he searched the area for signs of its existence. Yet, he never found a single clue. After countless failed attempts, he eventually dismissed it as nothing more than an old story. Now, after finally laying eyes on the hidden place himself, excitement rushed through him. Perga became convinced that the secrets buried there would give him everything he needed to become the next family leader. The opportunity seemed so perfect that he even started believing the god of Zahar was favoring him. That excitement did not last long. The moment he witnessed what truly existed beneath the surface, reality struck him hard. The underground area was filled with terrifying creatures. As he saw the monsters roaming through the darkness, Perga immediately regretted entering the place. The danger far exceeded anything he had expected. Before long, the creatures surrounded both Perga and everyone trapped alongside him. The group's situation continued to worsen. Their water supplies had already run out, and thirst was becoming a serious problem. While struggling to survive underground, Perga suddenly heard an unfamiliar sound. To his surprise, he somehow understood the strange language carried by the voice. The experience felt so unusual that he briefly wondered if he had somehow returned to the desert. Meanwhile, the scene shifted back to Turan. He wandered through the marketplace while observing everything happening around the Tomb of the Gods. The more he watched, the more troublesome the situation appeared. It became clear to him that the nobles intended to close off the entire area and investigate the tomb on their own. That realization made him far more cautious. Turan knew that if he continued moving around carelessly, someone might recognize the talisman on his face just as Chief Cal had done before. To avoid attracting attention, he decided that remaining quiet and keeping a low profile would be the safest option for now. As he continued walking through the market, he stopped at a shop and inquired about a particular material. The shopkeeper identified the substance as saltpeter. The name immediately triggered a memory. Turan recalled reading about it in the incendiary's book. At that moment, he finally realized that this was the same material he had abandoned researching in the past because he lacked the other ingredients required to continue. Remembering the destructive power once displayed by the incendiary, Turan concluded that trying to recreate the fire spirit's strength was worth the effort. Afterward, he began asking various merchants whether they carried sulfur. Most of them did not even recognize the name. Eventually, one person explained that sulfur was mainly found in volcanic regions. Its primary use was disinfection, and because there was almost no demand for it in the desert, obtaining it there would be extremely difficult. After hearing that explanation, Turan could not help regretting that he had failed to search for sulfur back in Komod before beginning his journey. Turan eventually understood that there was no need to journey all the way to the eastern lands. All he truly needed was to find a volcano somewhere within reach. Afterward, he ventured deeper into the desert and began forging weapons with saltpeter. Once everything was ready, he personally started testing their effectiveness. The outcome exceeded his expectations. By replacing stone ammunition with sand projectiles, he discovered that he could reshape them freely while they traveled through the air. This allowed him to either sharpen their penetrating force or scatter them across several directions during an attack. Although the technique consumed slightly more mana, it helped preserve his limited stock of crafted stones. He also found that sand-based methods could be used to restrain an opponent's legs or obscure their sight. As the experiments continued, another idea surfaced. He began thinking about moving through the sand itself, almost as if swimming beneath its surface. While training, his attention gradually drifted back to the nobles trapped inside the tomb of the gods. Many days had already gone by, and he briefly considered abandoning the matter and traveling to another city. The thought did not last long. Turan concluded that infiltrating the tomb was still possible. Even if the situation became dangerous, escape remained an option. At that moment, unusual sounds suddenly echoed nearby. Turning toward the noise, he spotted two individuals carrying a large sack with someone concealed inside. They moved in secret as they headed farther into the area. Turan immediately followed them while remaining invisible. As he observed the surroundings, he uncovered the truth. The people stationed there were abducting ordinary civilians. Before long, one of the leaders ordered a captured man to carry the load and step into a strange black void. The sight led Turan to a realization. The location was actually an animal control mana domain. As he continued watching, he overheard the kidnappers speaking nervously about someone called Perga. The name instantly caught his attention. He recognized Perga as the candidate expected to become the next leader of the Zahar family. At that point, Turan understood that the important figure they were discussing was imprisoned inside. Everything suddenly fit together. He finally understood why the group had occupied the area for so long. Hoping to gain favor with the Zahar family after rescuing the trapped child, Turan moved closer to the black void. Despite sensing the danger surrounding it, he stepped forward and entered. The instant he crossed through, his thoughts became clear. Turan realized that some outside influence had been affecting his mind. The discovery made him feel foolish for allowing himself to be manipulated. As his thoughts settled and his judgment returned, he began reevaluating everything he had previously assumed. Turan quickly realized there was no certainty that Perga was the type of man who returned favors. As he moved farther inside, he finally found Perga along with the people accompanying him. Among them was one of Perga's followers, the same man who had been abducted and sent into the area to deliver supplies. Not long after entering, the exhausted subordinate collapsed to the ground and began moaning in pain. The noise irritated Perga. Without hesitation, he drove a heavy kick into the man's head. The scene immediately reminded Turan why Perga Zahar carried such a terrible reputation. In his eyes, Perga was the kind of person who could take a life over something as insignificant as water and feel no remorse afterward. Nothing about him suggested that he would ever repay a debt. Then, in the middle of the uneasy silence, a strange voice suddenly reached Turan's ears. The mysterious voice declared that he was mistaken. It claimed that he was not the Night Hunter. Moments later, the same statement echoed once more. According to the voice, he was not the Night Hunter. Long ago, the fertile Inral plains had been ruled by giants. Their massive bodies consumed everything around them, and over time, the once rich land became a lifeless desert. Those giants required enormous amounts of water every day. When their thirst became impossible to satisfy, they turned humanity into slaves. They drained human blood to ease that thirst and slaughtered countless people daily. Then, during a moonless night beneath a sky swallowed by darkness, the Night Hunter of the Freyans appeared. He exterminated every giant and saved humanity from destruction. Filled with gratitude, the freed people offered him 3 of the most beautiful maidens in the land as wives. The children born from those unions inherited unusual abilities. One possessed the power to hide his body. Another gained authority over shadows. The last inherited the ability to create poison. After the Night Hunter ascended, a struggle erupted between the brothers for control of the desert. The eldest son, who could conceal his body, chose to leave rather than fight his siblings. The second brother, Master of Shadows, and the third brother, Master of Poison, plunged into a violent conflict that spread misery throughout the desert. Eventually, the eldest returned. He defeated both younger brothers and seized control of the desert for himself. That man later became the ancestor of the Zahar bloodline. As the ancient tale flowed through Turan's mind, the unseen voice continued revealing pieces of the distant past. The mention of a god left him unsettled. He suspected the story might be connected to the Zahar nobles who had entered the area earlier. Another realization soon followed. By blood, he himself was technically a distant descendant of that same lineage. As he continued through the underground passages, Turan came across a corpse-like figure along with several disturbing creatures that resembled walking dead. One of those creatures suddenly noticed him despite his invisibility. The discovery shocked him. Without warning, the creature rushed straight toward him at full speed. Turan avoided the creature's attack and immediately answered with a fire-based strike, but the creature slipped away from the attack just as easily. The situation put him on edge. He quickly realized that the creature was somehow capable of detecting him and concluded that it could see through the stealth abilities inherited from the Zahar bloodline. Without hesitation, Turan drew a mana stone and unleashed a full-powered strike against one of the creatures. The impact shattered its head apart and killed it instantly. What caught his attention next was the reaction of the others. The remaining creatures showed no response whatsoever to the death of their companion. When he attempted to absorb mana from the corpse, the result confirmed another suspicion. The body yielded almost no mana at all, proving that it was a magical creature. The amount he managed to collect was extremely small. Considering the creature's physical capabilities, it should have contained far more mana than that. At the same time, the holy relic showed no response. Its true nature remained a mystery. Just then, Purga and his followers arrived in the area. The moment Turan noticed them, he quietly retreated from sight. After finding the dead creature, Purga and his men assumed they might have already passed through that section before. Their ability to navigate had become unreliable some time ago. Even so, Purga sensed a threat nearby and referred to it as a rat hiding in the shadows. He briefly considered the possibility of a rescue team. The idea was quickly discarded. In his view, such a group would have already been discovered by now. He also believed that causing trouble in a place like this would immediately reveal an intruder's presence. Purga ordered Galthan to place traps throughout the surrounding area so the hidden trespasser could be caught. Galthan accepted the order at once and started making preparations. Purga then instructed Imelda to keep the surroundings illuminated at all times. Imelda wondered whether the hidden rat should be captured immediately. Purga merely smirked and chose to leave the intruder alone for the time being. He assumed the target was probably a surviving knight who had managed to stay alive through luck. Rather than hunting him down, Purga decided to let him wander freely and serve as bait for the monsters lurking within the labyrinth. Meanwhile, Turan continued watching everything from concealment. 3 days passed. By then, Turan and Purga's group had fallen into a strange situation. Both sides were forced to exist within the same endless darkness of the labyrinth. Fortunately, the traps placed by the barrier-bearer bloodline were completely visible to Turan through the sight granted by the holy relic. They posed no threat to him. In fact, the darkness often caused Purga's own group to stumble into their own traps, suffering repeated setbacks because of their mistakes. Unlike Purga's people, who could not even reliably determine their direction, Turan used the holy relic's power to establish several safe locations throughout the labyrinth. These locations became bases that allowed him to steadily expand his exploration deeper into the underground maze. From time to time, he discovered passages packed with large numbers of the strange creatures. Such routes could not be crossed without defeating the monsters one after another. Whenever that happened, Turan chose to make use of Purga's group instead. Doing so meant losing the chance to absorb the creature's mana. However, that hardly mattered. The amount of mana they provided was so insignificant that collecting it was barely worth the effort. During these clashes, several of Purga's followers lost their lives while battling the creatures. The members of Purga's group spoke among themselves, pointing out that the creatures being drawn toward them were leaving behind an increasing number of corpses. They assumed the monsters were targeting them because they still believed the knights remained alive. One of them admitted that if they had known the situation would develop this way, the surviving knights would have been kept alive rather than allowed to die. Others complained about the inconvenience of having nobody left to serve them. Another member brushed the comment aside, suggesting that none of them truly meant it in earnest. As Turan listened from the shadows, disgust grew within him. Not long afterward, another swarm of creatures appeared. Turan immediately recognized an opportunity. While Purga's group attracted attention through the noise they created and acted as living bait, he could use the distraction to advance farther into the labyrinth. As he pushed deeper into the maze, he eventually discovered a gigantic door. At its center rested an enormous eye. The structure was massive, clearly built on a scale intended for giants rather than humans. Turan considered the possibility that the door might lead out of the labyrinth. Suddenly, the eye shifted. Its gaze locked onto him. The eye identified him as a hunter-pursuer, but stated that the required conditions had not been fulfilled. Then its attention shifted. It seemed to notice the watch. Its reaction immediately changed. The eye recognized the object as a waver rider or mimic. At once, it declared that the conditions had been satisfied and offered entry. Turan remained silent. Confusion filled his mind as he stared at the enormous being before him. He wondered whether Waver Rider and Mimic were names of bloodlines that had yet to awaken within him. If two bloodlines truly existed inside him, that would mean he carried the heritage of a great family. As he reflected on the eye's words, another realization emerged. The eye did not appear to be judging him directly. Instead, it seemed to recognize the owner of the Holy Relic's powers rather than the owner of the bloodline itself. Turan concluded that the door was evaluating both the abilities of the relic and his bloodline together before making its judgment. Seeking answers, he requested information regarding Waver Rider, Mimic, and the door itself. The eye accepted the request without hesitation. It began by explaining Waver Rider. Waver Rider was classified as the first type. Its abilities included underwater breathing, enhanced physical capabilities beneath the water, and control over fluids. The explanation then shifted to Mimic. Mimic was also classified as the first type. Its abilities included flow detection, absorption, and mimesis. As Turan listened, he noticed something strange. He had never gained the ability to breathe underwater or manipulate fluids. This led him to believe that the door was using those abilities only for identification purposes rather than granting them directly. He then questioned the nature of the being standing before him. The response identified itself as the spirit of the door. To Turan, it resembled something like a librarian, though far more strict and far less human. His attention then turned to the labyrinth itself. He asked about its purpose and the method required to leave it. The spirit of the door revealed the truth. The place was known as the Labyrinth of the Night Hunter. According to the spirit, anyone who defeated the chief while possessing the correct 4 types would inherit the title of Night Hunter. The title immediately captured Turan's interest. A question surfaced in his mind. He began wondering whether becoming the Night Hunter was the same as becoming a god. The spirit explained that defeating the chief would reveal the path out of the labyrinth. Without warning, its voice began repeating error messages endlessly. The spirit listed Hunter, Pursuer, Waver Rider, and Mimic. It announced the existence of a 2-type error. Moments later, it mentioned Shadow Alchemist and marked the type as missing. Immediately afterward, it declared that the 4 required types had been satisfied. Another error appeared. The spirit reported that the identified types did not correspond to those of the Night Hunter. It then announced an error involving the opening of the labyrinth. A new message followed, stating that the labyrinth could no longer be sealed. The spirit detected personnel still remaining inside and reported the presence of unauthorized individuals. It attempted to contact its creator. An error occurred because the creator was no longer present. As a result, autonomous judgment was activated. The spirit then issued a deployment order to the chief of the labyrinth. At that moment, the enormous door slowly began to open. Turan watched carefully, wondering what awaited beyond it. As the gap widened, a gigantic humanoid creature came into view. A grin spread across the creature's face as it declared that Turan was not a night hunter. It labeled him an imposter and proclaimed that imposters deserved death. Turan reacted immediately. He launched attacks using both water and fire mana. The attacks barely affected the giant creature. They felt little more than minor irritation. Realizing victory was impossible alone, Turan abandoned the confrontation and retreated. The creature shouted after him and demanded that he stop. Soon afterward, numerous creatures resembling the giant emerged. They rushed toward him from every direction, attempting to seize and attack him. Turan narrowly slipped through their reach. Then another creature lunged directly at him from the front. He raised his shield to intercept the blow. The attack smashed through the shield with little effort. In response, Turan cut open the creature's throat. As he continued moving through the labyrinth, his thoughts returned to the labyrinth of the Night Hunter. It was a place capable of creating gods. Yet he still could not understand who had built such a place or for what purpose it had been created. Before long, the largest creature charged straight toward him and attempted to seize him. The attack missed. Turan's speed allowed him to avoid the grasp entirely. A single conclusion became clear in his mind. The battle would continue until that monster was killed. Elsewhere within the labyrinth, Purga and his followers were facing the same enemies. The prolonged fighting had already drained much of their strength. Then they noticed the largest monster approaching. Purga immediately ordered everyone to attack together. Before they could properly react, the giant creature drove its massive claws into the stomachs of two of his subordinates. The sight filled Purga with horror. He and the surviving members of his group launched a combined assault at once. Their efforts achieved nothing. The monster effortlessly avoided every attack and continued slaughtering them. Frustration boiled within Purga. Even the weaker creatures had already pushed them close to their limits. At this rate, complete annihilation seemed inevitable. Nearby, a voice mocked their desperate struggle, comparing it to a rat desperately fighting to stay alive. The man then suggested drawing the attention of the weaker creatures elsewhere. Without wasting a moment, the man rushed forward and swung his sword at the giant monster's knee. The blade sank deep into the target. A burst of wild laughter escaped him as he celebrated the damage he had inflicted on the creature's leg. The monster answered immediately. It seized him with one hand and hurled him into a nearby wall. The battle raged on. Meanwhile, Purga watched one subordinate after another lose their lives. Anger consumed him. He directed all of his hatred toward the monster, blaming it for everything that had happened. Driven by rage, he climbed onto the creature and repeatedly struck it with his sword. For a brief instant, he believed he had finally brought it down. The belief lasted only a moment. The monster's enormous claws suddenly ripped through his body. Purga could not understand how things had gone wrong. As his life slowly slipped away, his gaze landed on the monster. Strangely, the creature was no longer paying attention to him. Instead, it was looking somewhere else. The monster announced that it had finally located the fake night hunter. Confusion spread through Purga's fading mind. The creature was speaking those words while staring beyond him. Then Purga noticed the number 1,000. The monster had already slaughtered countless people. Even after all those deaths, it still was not satisfied. At that moment, attention shifted toward Turan. The monster's eyes were fixed directly on him. Although Turan remained hidden from everyone else through his invisibility, the monster had somehow discovered his location. The truth finally became clear to him. The rat had never been the target. It had been bait. After realizing this, Turan tightened his grip around his sword. Without hesitation, he launched a direct attack against the monster.